Imagine having before you the power to unravel the deepest mysteries of the human mind. In Outwitting the Devil, Napoleon Hill plunges us into a bold and fascinating interview with a figure as elusive as he is intriguing, the devil himself. Hill reveals in this text hidden for decades what he considers the invisible barriers that hold back our potential and the secrets to overcoming the forces that keep us trapped in fear, mediocrity, and doubt. Prepare yourself for an unprecedented mental journey, where Hill challenges conventions and confronts the devil in a revealing conversation that exposes the tricks and traps this being uses to keep us ensnared. With a strikingly direct approach, Hill explores how we can reclaim our power, conquer our fears, and achieve a personal freedom that, until now, seemed only a dream. This text is not merely a lesson in self-help, but a wake-up call, a rallying cry to take control of our lives and attain true mental and spiritual independence. As you listen to Outwitting the Devil, you'll encounter concepts that challenge common thinking and guide you toward a new vision of success, resilience, and personal power. Are you ready to discover how to outwit the devil and take the reins of your destiny? Note for the elector: to outsmart the devil, I have never read anything before. Above all, I felt very honored that Napoleon Hill trusted me enough. And then I read the manuscript. I could not reconcile it with a mechanical typewriter, as it had been kept by the family of the master for over 100 years. It could provoke the courage to reveal the work of the day in our churches, our schools, and society as it was known back then. This book, although written in 1938, is actually meant to shake our society today. In these very uncertain economic times, this book offers the keys for each of us to add value to the world around us, to recover, and to move forward after the challenges that help us regain success today. The original manuscript was very extensive. I edited it for impact in an effort to highlight certain points. Its predictions have come true over time. I have shortened the manuscript into a different font, and my comments may or may not be included. Please enjoy it. The literary critic, Dr. Napoleon Hill, is evocative and a seller of self-help books of all time. We ask that you delve into the real essence of what accounts for 98% of the creatures as we go through the book, taking a biographical tour to discover the greatest, most useful principles. But I didn't know how to use and apply them myself. Today, it is easy to mention the words and make a lasting decision to live by the principles and practice them, shedding light on everything it means to understand today. Dr. Hill's goal was personal success that would stimulate happiness. Finding your own rainbow means thinking you are in the most difficult moments you can imagine, a moment that led him to feel and act with encouragement and well-being. Just as it is for you to read this, shake off lethargy, negativity, and guide yourself toward a better, rewarding path. Just as I have guided you, you must choose to be passionate and make it happen as we rediscover and make magical discoveries that you can equal and surpass if you wish, because your only limitations are those you impose on yourself. This is to be the author of your own failures and successes. I interviewed the 500 most successful people in my life experiences. Mark Victor Hansen, co-author of the successful Chicken Soup for the Soul and co-author of Cracking the Code in a Flash. Chapter 1. My First Encounter. My main purpose has been to separate the causes of both failure and success from the trend or opportunity to get involved in. As a result of an interview I had with Mr. Carnegie, who wanted to enroll in the school of paying my studies by interviewing successful men, I wanted to write articles about my visit. Mr. Carnegie asked me if I had any idea or suggestion that I would like to offer him. I replied that I was prepared to put all my effort into it. Then he said, "Your idea of writing articles about what that entails is fine, but I must tell you that if you want to be useful for posterity, you can do so if you..." Failure as well as the causes of success. There are millions of ideas about the causes of success and failure, everything except the principles of personal success and failure. They spend 4 to 8 years acquiring knowledge with this understanding. After acquiring it, the comprehension of success is established by the experience of men and women in philosophy. I find nothing comparable. In our minds, we have few philosophers capable of teaching us. It is an opportunity to challenge a young person. Self-discipline is not enough for this task. It will require at least 20 years of tenacity. The person who commits to carry it out will have to face this type of research, which never proves to be lucrative. Through this type of task, there have been significant developments. many will probably receive recognition only after their own death. How would you respond? Mr. Hill accepted Carnegie's challenge, including Theodore Roosevelt, Thomas Edison, and Addison Kellett, among others. His effort culminated finally in Volume 8 of The Laws of Success, after more than 25 years of research. He personally researched all the principles of the current spiritual masters. Perhaps a year after it was published, he managed to master the most important elements in his research. We can learn that process from him. As part of this labor, you must interview not only the successful, but also carefully analyze many failures. By failures, I mean men who have not achieved their goals in life. For inconsistent as it may seem, you will learn more from what you will learn from so-called triumphs. Towards the end of your work, if you carry it out, you will be surprised to discover that the cause of failure is a natural force so intangible that it might as well be called the other self. It should be noted that its influence is present only in those who are forced to overcome difficulties. Experience has taught me about success, just as when what he calls failure obliges one to think correctly. The so-called failure is nothing more than a signal. Now, most failures are due to thoughts that settle in their minds. If they had the courage to change them, most failures would cease to exist. With the current economic depression, many are now facing their recovery for the first time. Their own fear and the current situation overwhelm them. The purpose that has driven me incessantly has been a vague idea of what he wanted to say about the causes of failure and success. I have encountered men and women who had been classified as winners many years ago. I had mentioned that discovery. It emerged as crucial in my life, which shaped my ability to overcome difficulties like never before. This discovery was made possible only after two crucial moments in my life. Having lost the talents that could have been in my professional income, I decided to enter the advertising profession through a university extension. After a year, during which I was overtaken by circumstances, I entered the franchise business with LaSalle, becoming the president of Batsy. It seemed like a misfortune. Then the disagreements with my partners emerged. The allure of advertising remained. I was establishing a school of advertising and sales. The company was doing well, and we were united. I participated in World War I. Words cannot describe my departure from the United States under the personal direction of a perfectly solid magazine, The Golden Rule. Despite the fact that it grew rapidly and soon obtained a circulation of 356,000, by 1918 that would represent 45,000 in today's prices. According to consumer price tables compiled by the Office of National Distribution, projecting that by 2020 it would be $200,000, using nominal GDP per year for when the vast majority of the national magazine distribution would be $1 million in capital. The more we triumphed, the more discontent I felt, due to minor inconveniences caused by partners. I withdrew from Charon. This was only the beginning of the Golden Rule magazine. It followed the publication of Sexus magazine. Soon after, I established a training school to train an army of 3,000 people for $0 per seller who took my classes, aiming for a $30,000 income. Success concerning money, once again I began to feel uneasy. I realized that money would never make me happy. Without the slightest hesitation, I gave up a business I could have succeeded in, and my associates thought I had gone mad. I was tempted to agree with them, but it seemed that I was seeking happiness and had not found it. In light of my strange actions, what man would offer? I felt uneasy again. I didn't feel that money would ever make me happy. I could have written about the decision to abandon a certain situation that did not align with my personal mission. New opportunities opened up, and it was the best decision of my professional life. Do you remember that difficult decision, but one you knew had been right? This happened in late autumn of 1923. I found myself without a plan to get out of my problem, which was primarily due to a lack of funds. Many times in the past, it had made it impossible for me to obtain what I needed. I was shocked. It seemed I was completely at a loss. I thought of a dozen plans to solve my issues, but they all seemed impossible to implement. I felt like someone whose every attempt to get out of trouble brought me back to the worst and most painful of human indecisions. But I didn't know how to apply them. Unbeknownst to me, I was living through experiences that, as I had been told, linked to my other self. My anguish was so great that I felt paralyzed by indecision. Have you ever felt that way? This was Hell's life, passing from job to job, while many desire and seek satisfaction in their work and lives. It had been inflicted, at least in part, by his own professional life and circumstances, almost the same as anyone else facing the current economic situation, forcing himself to think and analyze to discover his other self. Failure becomes part of the difficulty. I had a feeling I wanted to breathe fresh air and think clearly. Suddenly, I felt paralyzed for several minutes, stuck to the ground. Everything around me radiated a high-energy vibe, and a great calmness invaded me. The atmosphere began to change, coming from deep within me, and it manifested in a way I can only describe as clarity. The message was clear. It was time for me to return home immediately with the information I had gathered. My other self had been startled by the experience. It was unlike any I had ever had. I rushed home. As I approached, I saw the disappointment in the faces of my neighbor's children. It was a time of distress I had never experienced before. I entered the house, sat down at the typewriter, and began to transform my findings into writing. The first sheet in the typewriter reminded me of the overwhelming thought that had flooded my mind outdoors. Your mission in life is to complete the task you've been trying in vain to escape. Failure? You're seeking happiness. Learn this. Happiness comes from helping others find it. I realized my foolishness through frustration in the world. I would live an experience that would position me to fulfill the ideology I had been instructed to complete. I began to see that finding happiness comes from offering a completed service. After publishing the manuscripts, I reached the end of the rainbow in life, feeling fulfilled. Then, the experience I thought was foolish began to unfold. I was venturing into what seemed a fool's mission. The idea of writing a personal success ideology felt like a dream. I twisted in my chair, justifying myself for taking the page from the typewriter. Yet the need to write reconciled me with my task, and I moved forward with strength. The desire to quit was intense, but remember that it forced me to carry on. It might have been the driving force behind everything that has happened. I can see that all those challenges I faced were among my hidden experiences because they pushed me to keep working, to become someone more useful to the world. During the first months of 1924, I felt tempted by the desire to return to the grand business I had loved. I enrolled in the Metropolitan Business College to expand my capabilities. By the end of that year, we were adding new courses until we had surpassed our previous record, leading the school to new heights. That mission began to feel alive in my veins again. I handed over the business to my partners and started a conference about the ideology of success to share my experiences from previous years. One night, I had scheduled an appearance at a conference in Canton where I was introduced to Don R. Meat. He was very interested in the ideology of success and invited me to meet with him the next day. That would take place on the first day of the following month, and he wanted to recruit me as the editor of the Daily News, the paper I was working on. However, in July, a figure from the underworld was killed by a police officer for exposing members of the Canton police force in his newspaper. This occurred during Prohibition. Donald Rain Mallet, the editor of the Daily News, had uncovered police corruption in Canton and was thus undertaking a campaign against them, aimed primarily at the chief of police. It is known that he requested the mayor of Ohio to silence local underworld figures, including at least one ex-convict from Pennsylvania. On July 7, 1926, an article titled "More Murders in Canton" was published, detailing the killings carried out by gambling bosses. Geo, upon hearing about Meat's murder, fled the country to West Virginia. He was a private investigator hired by the county prosecutor, a former police detective, and they ultimately advised me the morning after Meat's assassination that I had 1 hour to leave the area. They warned me that I was expected to stay longer, but that hour was crucial. I hurried to my car and drove to the house of some friends, where I remained until the killers were apprehended. That experience matched very well with the emergencies that force men to think quickly. The experience I had gone through years earlier, where I faced temporary indecision, had been filled with dread. During the time I was hiding, I rarely went outside, keeping a hand on a loaded automatic pistol that I carried with me. I was prepared for immediate action if any strange vehicle approached. I directed myself to the basement and carefully examined the car that had been there for months. During this time, my search for the causes of failure and success had filled me with courage and ambition. But as I reflected on my circumstances, I felt I was slipping into apathy. It must have resembled the feeling one experiences when they realize every effort they make to overcome adversity is a swamp they create themselves. If the seed had not germinated during those months of uncertainty, doubt and fear, I would have faced two disastrous outcomes. I found myself in a constant state of indecision and fear, leading me to idleness, accompanied by the heaviness of my despair. My reasoning capacity had almost vanished, and I struggled to escape this mental state. However, all previous emergencies seemed to have conspired against me, and among all my difficulties, there was one that seemed more painful than all the rest. I spent my best years chasing a rainbow, searching for a way to succeed while feeling more helpless than any of my failures. This thought was almost maddening. I was giving lectures all over the country, boasting about telling others how to succeed while I was incapable of applying it to myself. I faced the world with a growing sense of confidence, yet self-contempt on my face. Not infrequently I told myself to print what I had started to place before them, the remedy against failure that they themselves were unable to apply. Those who had murdered Mr. Meat had been judged, and they felt perfectly secure regarding their work. However, I could not escape because now I was facing the criminals who had forced me into a situation of initiative that felt like a nightmare. I was alive. I could move, but I felt stuck. With that, I was becoming apathetic, not just toward myself, but also toward those who had offered me a roof during an emergency in my life. Unless you have gone through that kind of experience, you cannot understand. My reasoning capacity had almost vanished due to the fear of physical harm, and subsequently I began to wonder, has fear ever paralyzed you? Or does fear prevent you from acting positively? It can either motivate you or paralyze you. By recognizing this, you can change your life permanently for the better. There are those same feelings of anger followed by apathy. They feel discouraged and lack economic satisfaction. They feel angry and allow that anger to consume them. For you and a loved one, compare that to someone who managed to find hope, inspiration, and happiness in their life. The most dramatic moment of my life came more than a year after the Canton incident. I was at the top of a hill overlooking the city, and before that night ended, I began to walk. Confused thoughts turned into clear ones. I must have been saying to myself over and over again, "There is a way." I must have repeated that phrase thousands of times, feeling completely disgusted with myself. Then, like a bolt of lightning in the sky, an idea arose that made my blood surge through my veins. You have been humiliated by poverty to the point of forcing yourself into today's economic situation, which has dealt you a blow, damaging your confidence. Consider it a test. In the 1920s and early 30s, force yourself to discover your strength, and by persevering, you will generally obtain the success you seek. For the first time in years, I remembered what Mr. Carnegie had said. You will discover it at the end of your task. This realization often forces men to change their habits. I walked around the school, but now I knew I was about to be freed from the state I had placed myself in. I realized that this grave state was not just for discovering my other self, but to prove something. I was teaching others that success was feasible. Soon I would burn the manuscripts I had prepared to show others that they were the masters of their destinies. Another thought emerged in my mind: how to overcome the difficulties that arise from your failures. Speak with authority, because you are about to make a decisive, fearless statement. With that thought, I found myself in a state of euphoria I had never known before, shaking off the apathy I had fallen into. For a brief moment, I felt happy for having endured that torment, as the experience provided me with the success I had laboriously diverted. I came to a halt, brought my feet together and stood still for several minutes. At first, this felt strange. But then a thought arose in the form of an order, as if given by a military commander to a subordinate. The order was simple: go to Philadelphia, where you will receive help to publish. No sooner had I received the order than a calmness washed over me, a calmness I had not known for more than a week. I jumped out of bed and immediately began to pack my things. My reason told me that I was embarking on an adventure that could potentially lead to financial support. $50. You should know immediately the answer to that question, I thought, as if it had been spoken aloud. Your other self will be in charge. During this absurd moment of preparing to go to Philadelphia, the thought surfaced when my other self exploded with ideas. I asked my brother-in-law for the $50, and he was willing to lend it to me. If you're going to be gone for a long time, I'd better give you $100. Although I knew he didn't have it, that was the amount I required. I felt relieved when he handed me the money. If he had known why I was going to Philadelphia, he might have thought I was crazy instead of going to hunt for financial support. I spent the night before in turmoil, with voices in my head telling me I was a fool. By morning, I arrived in Philadelphia early, looking for a modest boarding house. My other self took charge again as I entered the city, with a little more than $20 of what remained from my financial resources. When I approached the reception to request a room, my other self calculated the series of rooms, whose cost would consume nearly everything I had left. My brother-in-law picked up my bags and handed me the ticket to my room. The Prince of Wales was the first to appear at the counter with such deference. My own family members respected me. At least, I believed they did, and I felt like a burden to them. No man in the mental state I was in should have been more than a burden to everyone around me. My other self was determined to separate me from that state. I handed over my belongings and began to calculate everything. My other self ordered me to discard all unnecessary items. At that moment, I would act as if I had all the money in the world. My living situation was new and strange for me. I didn't believe in it. For almost half an hour, my other self took over and began pouring out a stream of thoughts that surged in my mind with such intensity. Note from Karen. Hell had acquired a new dimension. I desired to be rid of the past. We firmly agreed that it was also essential to be in the right environment. The Hell Foundation once told me, first, buy yourself a good hotel room. That point was crucial, yet we recommend moderation at that point. He had no receipt. Strange orders came from a source he couldn't identify. Now you are completely in charge of your other self. Your body, in fact, is occupied by two similar entities. One of these entities is motivated by faith, while the other responds to fear. The entity of faith took the lead that night. The entity of fear acts for convenience, you can call it that. Fear has no limits. It recognizes no boundaries. It does not understand the word luxury in a nice hotel as a means of avoiding motivation. The entity motivated by fear is not dead. It simply waits for you to expect an opportunity to enter. You can't keep your mind tightly closed to all thought. Allow yourself to be free. Don't let worry about money overtake you. It will come to you when you need it. Now let's go to the faith that is now in charge of your body. The law of nature is that while it is in charge of your body, it will implant thoughts in your mind that will lead you to the most logical and convenient means of reaching your goals. Note that your other self will not do the work for you. It will help you realize that this always begins with your strongest desire. What brought you here is to publish and distribute the principles of success and failure. Calculate what you will need, a man who will provide this necessary capital for you. Recognize all the people you know who might provide the financial help you require. You will recognize him immediately. Reach out to that person. However, according to your methodology, present the general terms of a business transaction. Do not make demands. If you have had any doubts about your other self, if you fail temporarily, your other self will remain in charge and will continue to fight against fear and worry in your mind. Now you will begin to move to discover your other self. Physically, you are the same as before, but a change has occurred in you. I observed that I was not dreaming. I stood up and walked to a mirror. The look on my face had changed from an expression of doubt in my mind about whether my physical body had been overthrown 2 nights before. Note from Karen. Here, while editing, I realized that these are some of the most decisive moments in the author's life. What has been described here could also simply be called a call to awaken or a wake-up slap. Chapter 2 reveals to me a rebirth through which I had been separated from what I had not had before, despite the fact that I wouldn't be able to obtain the necessary funds. I was close. I could already see it in my possession. That faith was an indescribable feeling. There is a fact that everyone who has gone through a similar experience knows. I was ready to follow the instructions immediately, even though I thought it was an impossible mission. They had disappeared one by one, people I knew who could provide me the $5,000, while I was going through a list of more than 300 individuals. The darkest hour is just before dawn. However, the list of my acquaintances had run out, and I was working hard to concentrate my mind on that list. After 2 nights of stopping long enough to sleep, I dozed off for a few minutes. When I regained consciousness, the name of someone emerged in my mind. Mr. Pelton. That would be the plan through which I would achieve my goals. I remembered Mr. Pelton as someone who had published books before. Note from Karen. Causes for this include how an acquaintance can become a partner. I requested a typewriter and addressed a letter to him, presenting the plan just as it had been handed to me. He was in Philadelphia to see me the next day when I explained my ideology briefly. After a few minutes, he suddenly stopped, looked at me and said, "I will publish your books." The contract was signed, my manuscripts were handed over, and he provided the necessary capital. He printed the books for clients located in practically every city. My first royalty check from the sale of my books arrived just as my other self said, "Your only limitation is in your mind." Note from Karen. Does this statement sound true? Perhaps I have been my own worst enemy, sabotaging myself. Let's discover our other self so that each of us can understand what this other self is. Mr. Pelton came to see me in Philadelphia. The immediate financial plan formed in my mind was that they had to undergo a drastic change and learn to sell cars instead of used ones, as almost all of them did. Then I remembered that they had just graduated from college, and who would learn the tricks in the automobile market? The idea could develop in sellers. The idea was so powerful that I could make a long-distance call to the sales manager of the Jano company, of which he was the owner and manager. He was impressed and sent me to the plant immediately to train 15 students. The plan was set in motion. My earnings from selling my books began to arrive, taking care of all my expenses during this time of economic depression when funds had become available to everyone. Sometimes the help arrived a little late, but I can say with certainty that my encounter at the crossroads where I have been does not recognize limitations. My desired goals can face failure, and I am sure of the truth of this statement, just as I write these lines. Note from Karen. The other side of failure is how many times we allow a permanent failure to happen instead of learning from it. Many faced countless adversities during their quest for greater benefit, advancing toward greater success. Some of the millions of men and women who have experienced unpleasant events discover in their other self that this discovery will guide them like a source of power that overcomes obstacles. There is great power to discover. Note from Karen. The work of Geo was published during times of great tension. People are finding hope and courage for success. I believe we can find many similarities during times of great economic uncertainty. People are discovering new paths for themselves and their families, and there will be great success stories that we will tell. You will find yourself among those success stories as a hidden blessing. I have made another discovery. I particularly find that there is a solution for every difficulty, no matter how challenging it may seem. Note from Karen. There is a solution, no matter how difficult it may seem. While it is hard to see, the general retrospective usually confirms that the seed of a similar benefit emerges from defeat and all kinds of adversity. Observe that from the flower can germinate the seed of which I speak. That seed may not be seen in one way or another. It is not my intention to comprehend poverty and need. It filled me with fear and made me realize the privilege of helping thousands of people who have come into my life, and I am doing everything I can in my research over a quarter of a century on principles of truth that have been useful to me. I am more impressed by discovering that each of the leaders I have examined was besieged by difficulties. Note from Karen. Each of the great leaders faced temporary failures before achieving true success. From Christ to those who confronted various forms of adversity, I justify the conclusion that intelligence enables men to overcome many obstacles before being granted useful advice in a remarkable way. I do not know exactly what this other self is, but I have absolute faith in difficult moments. It may not be suitable for my needs, depression, or misery for millions of people, but we do not lack many blessings. One of the most important is that being forced to work is more of a blessing than a curse if examined by those who were harmed by this situation. The habits of men force them to resort to, note from Karen, there is something infinitely worse than not working at all. This depression was a greater light than the changes it brought about. Was it perhaps being influenced by the immediate effects of the economic disaster? A true crisis can turn our difficulties into a curse. The year I spent in withdrawal was the harshest of my life, but the experience brought me what I needed and reduced the suffering, and the knowledge gained from it was invaluable. Emerson defined this so clearly. Note from Karen. Ralph Waldo Emerson, 1803 to 1882, explained that for everything you have lost, you have gained something more. His journal dated January 8, 1800, also spoke of a system of compensations. Every defect has its compensation, every sacrifice is rewarded, and every adversity is overcome through temporary failure. I know, however, that no experience in my life has been entirely devoid of some other failures in the past, because now that my other self has taken charge of me, I have reached a point where my former entity of fear remains. Those who face difficulties will help others who have problems. I am sure that no effort we make will fail to have some form of appropriate reward. Service is not given by a source that can be made from the benefits of your other self, and greed, envy, and fear cannot be present. However, if you have the strange distinction of being a man who views things from an unconvincing perspective, it is certain and unhappy. But this perspective does not matter, because through my other self, I can acquire all material things. What more could someone want than mental peace? What could anyone desire more? The sincere desire to be useful to others led me to accept the splendid fortune that was mine. Fortunately, it cannot be measured solely by material wealth. It is much greater than all those things when reduced to their most liquid terms. They are stronger than banks. This other fortune of mental peace and joy manifests in those who can concentrate on their goal and forget themselves while doing so. I do not mean to say that material objects can replace the power that transforms our thoughts into reality. Infinite intelligence knows more about our desires than we do. It would not be wise to pray without having experienced prayer. My experience with prayer has taught me that if prayer is to be answered, it requires a plan, and that plan should involve natural means and personal effort. I know nothing about any favor that can work positively in a mind that is filled with fear. Note from Karen. Is prayer a part of the most suitable plan for achieving the goal? If you are to succeed, you must act in a new way. My way of praying is different now. I used to pray whenever I could before seeking these worldly goods and receiving greater blessings. I have discovered that this plan is better than being offended when I thank Him and recognize the blessings that have crowned my efforts. I was amazed at the prayer of gratitude for what I already possessed and had appreciated. For example, I discovered that I possess a body without illness. I have a reasonably sound mind with which I can offer useful service to many, the freedom I so desire in body and spirit, and the ability to help those who have been less fortunate. I discovered that humanity can be mine easily. The least important thing I found was that I have the ability, whether to give thanks for what I have or to ask for more. It is very useful for anyone reading this book to make a similar inventory. It could reveal some invaluable possessions and blessings in life. Let us give thanks for each of them. In a moment of adversity, I will force myself to think about my perspective. Some signs we have passed through are of such proportions that millions of people doubt. Indecision and fear are present today at a crossroads of doubt. Try to familiarize yourself with the useful lesson of nature. Observe the night in its usual places. The sun rises to illuminate the darkness as Mother Earth produces an abundance of food flowing down the hill that the birds receive. They have learned to meet the necessary food requirements that the active summer follows the inactive winter. They did this before the Depression began. The nature of men has ceased to function normally, and fear clouds the observation of these simple facts, which could be a starting point for those who wish to change their material or financial status. But if I can, with all due modesty, help change your material or financial status, do not confuse the word belief with the word desire. The advantages of financial and material wealth are the only sure power through which a desire can become reality, and here is the right place for anyone to experience using this power towards any form of constructive desire. There are no prominent escape routes from this fact. You will reap what you sow. Note from Karen. Change your material or financial status by first changing your thoughts. The publication of Think and Grow Rich in 1973 marked the beginning of this manuscript. Napoleon Hill started it, and it can empower you to realize your greatest success. The importance of transforming your thoughts towards success is crucial. If Edison had stopped and simply given up, the energy from electricity would not have been harnessed to make that consumer product for civilization. Nature stumbled upon temporary failure before this secret became evident. Nature continued trying until it obtained the answer that had previously been called miracles in another era. This is why he was able to achieve success, because he became familiar with his goal. If he had not known it, his achievements would not have revealed the discernment for those who know and trust in the truth. Truth has a way of becoming reality. Sometimes it comes in audible words, and other times it manifests silently. I have also observed that our mental state affects whether or not we function. My concept of the other self has recently been discovered as an approach that we can control and direct through the simple process of faith. This is just another way of saying that now there is a mental state known as faith that apparently opens before us a means of communicating with sources of power beyond our physical senses. The sixth sense arrives when you are connected to this power, which we might assume is a guardian angel, and indeed, it can be something close to a miracle. I do know how this method works. It is an intelligence that penetrates every atom of matter. Man is endowed with this infinite intelligence that transforms desires into reality. I know that for many years, I have maintained the habit of taking inventory to determine how many of my weaknesses I have overcome and how many progresses I have made, if any, during the past year. It is worth rereading this several times as it contains the essence of faith. According to their point of view, faith is a sixth sense we carry with us, the first cause of all actions. This is a practical or scientific faith that emphasizes personal equations for success. We speak about your personal success equation, which could be formulated as P plus T XAXA plus F equals sign A, where P stands for the right association and A for the appropriate action. Success occurs when you combine these elements with a powerful mental state. Chapter 3 will provide a brief description of the history that preceded public recognition. You will understand that this personal story has helped me. It was this final incantation that twisted the tale until it shouted its confession. In 1929, with that fateful turn of the wheel, my income ceased completely. All my funds collapsed and were destroyed. I was caught in the midst of a spiritual hurricane of such magnitude that no one could quell the storm, and the stampede of fear swept through Washington, D.C., the city from which I had started nearly a quarter of a century earlier. It seemed to me that all I had was time after 3 years of restless soul-pressing for me to teach a success ideology when the world was filled with failure and the minds of men were overwhelmed. One afternoon, while I was in my car in the shadow of the Capitol, this unprecedented thought arose, one that no human being had to prove to the organization to which I had once belonged. The ideology of self-determination was once again put into practice, or perhaps it was just a simple theory. I also realized the assertion I had made hundreds of times about a corresponding advantage, that if there were a global depression, when I began to search for my ideology, I made the most astonishing discovery. I did not understand that I had lost my courage, my strength had weakened. The worst part was that I found myself trapped under the thumb of the author of a self-determination ideology, paralyzed by the knowledge that I could not get my ideology to work for me. While moving in a state of dancing with joy, I finally had the author of the ideology caught under his thumb and paralyzed by the same knowledge. He must have been working while I was looking back at the circumstances that had caused so much success, only to let me fall into pleasant depths. It was delivered to me in the form of a power that could eliminate that hypnotic feeling of apathy with which I had been bound during the interview. My initiative and courage, as has been described, were bound during the Great Depression. This is the way that fear controls human beings, the sum and the fact of having learned from such commercial and professional achievements of life that arise through the application of 2 or more minds working with a goal. My objective was to carry out my plan to convey the fact of having understood the power of this higher use of this power that had been working like superior minds. In a note from Karen, the interview sat at the foot of Lincoln Memorial. Was it real? In which he lived his life and shared his revelations, the first words of Geo upon discovering that his examined record was besieged by difficulties. Hill also describes in his works how these masters overcame their internal conflicts with the mastermind to propel their triumphs. Think of a group to help overcome adversity, and now briefly the strange interview that you are about to read. After reading it, did you actually interview the imaginary? Some might wish they had the answer. I will respond in the only sincere way I could. It could have been real, just as he proclaimed. Whatever the nature of the information transmitted, was the interview transmitted? It is information they are trying to find their place in the world, whether transmitted in the form of fact or fiction. Careful reading. I'm not at all concerned about the true source of the information or the truth. What you are about to read concerns me only the belief that the interview conveys information that those who think that life has not been friendly have made the central theme of this book in the way that best fits my nature. I have experienced enough of the principles. That is enough for me, so I pass on to you. Perhaps you will make it pay with useful dividends. I trust that from its message, you will draw something you can use without worrying about it. If you want my very personal, sincere opinion, I believe that entering forcibly into the consciousness of the interview with questions that could not be evaded was an interview with the questions that could not be evaded. Karen has the mister tied to the earth, interrogating in a courtroom somehow. You will see how it was achieved. Perhaps it forced them to unite in a spirit of perfect harmony with the same purpose to exercise the power of God that deposits everything that is, everything that was, and everything that will be. To obtain precise answers, being a thinker, I can expose my fears through this ability to be truly accurate and precise in exposing their tricks in such a way that we can avoid their lives. By knowing their tricks, we can avoid their pee. He deciphered the secret code by which he demands very simple questions, and I demand that he give me direct and truthful answers. Are you ready? In this interview, you will address me as Your Majesty. You must know that I control 98% of the human mind. Note of Karen. How did Your Majesty originate such a reaction in me? I realized that it was probably that reaction, and I kept reading. What do your tests consist of? Your Majesty, some things you will understand. I will describe myself and correct false ideas. A good idea, Your Majesty. Start by telling me about my physical appearance. Why, my dear sir, would I feel empowered by such a hindrance? Like the earth, I am made of negative energy. I also occupy half of every atom of matter. Perhaps you will better understand my nature if I tell you what I am about to proclaim. You are placing a declaration that neither the world nor the stars nor the sun would exist. That is correct? Absolutely correct. Well, who occupies the other half? The other half refers to the opposition. It is what you are tied to. Is that your assertion? No, it is not my assertion. You will know why it is true when this interview ends. You will understand that, truth or not, no world could exist as you do. I am not a beast with a forked tongue. Of 98 out of 100 people, you yourself said, who originates all misery in this world. On the other hand, I boast that I occupy representing the thoughts of you earthbound people. My opposition controls positive thought. The control of people's minds is empty. In the human brain, I plant the seeds of such thoughts so that I can occupy and control the instruments to obtain and maintain control and instruments to control thought. Please continue and describe your ingenious tricks. Your instrument for mental control is fear. I plant fear, and as they germinate and grow through use, they are effective. They are the fear of poverty, criticism, illness, loss of love, old age, and the fear of poverty, criticism, illness. Which of these 6 fears works with you? Ultimately, poverty and death at some point. All these people through one of these fears skillfully believe they are. The people believe I am standing just after their death for eternal punishment for the mind of that person through some form. It is as useful to me as the fear of what occupies space in the human mind. Your Majesty, about human beings, the history is very old. More than 1 million years ago, when the first man took control of all humanity. But my enemies placed their thoughts in the minds of men, and I have done very well until now, having lost. I take as a response that men who think it is correct. What exactly do you mean by that? In the world, like love, faith, hope, positive factors of all natural law, throughout the planets and to all the stars balanced in comparison to those that operate in the mind of the stars and planets. I prefer to control by what means the complement that is tied to the earth. By passing through the people who return to my plane from the plane, it complements my being. I constantly work preparing the minds of those who can allow me to appropriate them when they return to my plane. I work to prepare human minds to gain control of human minds while being armed. Poverty deliberately discourages people. Poverty discourages men from thinking and illness. An ill body discourages the mind on earth, which helps me gain control of each invocation. These represent who their main enemies are regarding people thinking and acting for themselves. Voltaire, Emerson, Thomas Paine, and Abraham Lincoln. And you say that truth uses wealthy men because it discourages the independence of men. Some wealthy men serve harm depending on how that wealth is used. One of my worst enemies? That is interesting. Rockefeller's fortune more than others. Money defeats illnesses of the physical body in all of its manifestations. It is one of my most effective weapons, the fear of poverty, Rockefeller money in hundreds of different areas, which are used to gain and maintain control over their own minds. The instruments for controlling people are exterminating sites where my favorite allies reside and helping eradicate dishonesty in the highest practices of trade and the golden rule, and that does not harm my cause in any way. They say they are on the road to hell. They control them with a yes or a no. I have corrupted the mind of those who are confused by their tendency to think backward and forward. The battlefield of Rockefeller is followed by an explanation about hell. I believe the author is challenging us to have several ideas at the same time, as throughout the book you will find them. You say liquor and cigarettes. I can understand how they are independent, but I don't see what they have to do with it. I want you to know that cigarettes destroy the resistance, destroy the capacity for ingenuity, and help in other ways to prevent people from thinking. Did you know that I have millions of young people consuming hundreds of thousands of cigarettes a day? This means I have little by little diminished their power of resistance. One day, I will add that they destroy thought until they have won the threefold and fourfold any habit that weakens their minds. Your comparisons decrease the power of resistance and discourage other human relationships. I never thought it was your majesty. However, your explanation sheds light on a habit that you now proclaim. I am proud of it. It increases every day. Soon I will have almost all of them. I now have followers of the habit. I include every person starting to acquire the habit. They are acquiring it, and their older brothers and sisters. Which do you consider? The control of human minds, cigarettes. Once I get a young person to join my club, I can induce that person to take the habit of liquor, related habits that destroy independence. This was written in 1938, long before it was here, just like anywhere else. Napoleon spoke of his time with some of his medical opinions. I had misinterpreted the interview. I believed that it was real and very powerful. I accept your apologies. Many people have questioned my power, and I caught them. I do not ask anyone to believe in me. I prefer that people do so cleverly and forcefully, asking people. Your Majesty, forgive my rudeness, but I could not now say that you are the most detestable demon, that the innocent always had a bad concept of you, to leave people alone while they lived, that death. Now I know from your shameless confession that you make them go through hell on earth about what I want, exercising self-control. It is not that you imitate me. Instead of criticizing me, you call yourself. You should have forced me into this interview. You frighten unless you win and exercise a greater self-control over personalities. I came here to learn more and tell me about the many tricks you have devised. Your most powerful weapon now? That is a question to enter human minds and control them. Right now, I am trying to provoke another. They are helping to implicate the United States in it. The more I can operate my instrument, call it massive fear. I used this instrument to provoke the economic depression in 1929, and if I possess every man, woman, and child in the world, I will dominate the world which I have been struggling to obtain for thousands of years. Note from Karen. I sow the seeds of fear throughout the world, known in our time as terrorism. The response to this, through the work of hell added to his list of credentials, the current economic situation feeds the minds of men with, I see your point, and who are you? An ingenious occupation is carried out through people in the minds of people in all areas of life. If he does not intend to think, I can manipulate him, people in the world. If all people are interested in the welfare of those people you control, you are interested in all the tricks by which you gain control. So start with your trick. But I am defenseless, so calm down, and your fellow earthbound ones will defend themselves. Please tell me first about your most ingenious trick. If you force me to give this secret up, there are still millions who live and billions yet to be born. I beg you to let me overlook this. Is that right? No, it is not fine, but it is correct. You have no idea. For millions of years I have dominated ignorance. Now you come and will prevent me from using it. I use them. Don't you realize that you will force me to make this confession that you are forcing me to give? You have no sportsmanship. Please stop messing around and asking for clemency from someone who would destroy you. If I could, I would. With a sense of humor, you would. Through your own. The earth where you punish innocent people to the end. It leads me to devote myself to my affairs. It is just that you control people through their own knowledge about independent thinking. This confession is my main weapon through which I gain control of their minds. By entering quietly into the minds of the people, I implant the habit. I wish I could avoid using it. Wandering on any topic leads directly to what they call hell. Please describe all the forms in which people who think for themselves never do anything for themselves. They are indecisive. A vagabond is one who lets life throw him without protesting or fighting. He does not know what he wants out of life and spends his time reacting to external circumstances. A vagabond is one who lets himself be guided by external circumstances. I give them to him. A vagabond is one who cannot think for himself, and for that reason, I can take possession of his own brain. For that reason, I can take the initiative and lead my own ideas into their minds. I think I understand the precise ways by which people obtain first control of a human being. I obtain it while the person is a child and before the owner is born. I do this by manipulating the physical inheritance. Therefore, you will see that I have... Yes, continue and describe these two doors by which humans gain access. Just as I have said, I help grant them the greatest amount before they are born. They call this principle physical inheritance. After that, those tied to the earth call the environment a means by which the habit comes into being. The mind is nothing more than the tool of the mind, and I implant the habits that lead. Tell me about the most common habits. One of my clever tricks is that I enter into the minds of people. The most useful habits for me are fear, revenge, anger, vanity, and evident laziness at any age. But I achieve better results when the person is young before their owner has learned to think. I can install habits that keep the doors open. Now let's return to the habit of indecision. It is their cleverest trick to control them. I teach people to wander during their time, knowing the occupation they wish to pursue in life. Habits relate to wandering in a direction. I also use environmental habits to train children in the habit of going to school without goals or objectives. Now tell me about those that cause people to become indecisive. Developing the habit of indecision is one of the tricks that public school teachers and religious tutors have. Don't reveal this trick. If you do, you will be condemned by most. The newspapers will not dare to hide it from us, and in fact, no one will like it. You know that few people of this kind exist. And the description of my second best trick would be one of the most controversial aspects. Concerned about how it would be received after your death, the family has to follow the arguments of H regarding the system. Then make your own decision. Thus, no one will like my second best trick. Go ahead and answer. You will regret this, sir, as it will divert attention from me to you, and they will hate you for discovering my methods. I do not induce people to wander. This trick is not at all about that. The first is to influence the minds of young people, while parents and teachers serve my purpose in helping me. They themselves fulfill their task in various ways, not reaching the minds of children, nor the true cause. Have you ever heard a parent finish a child's sentence? Think about the science project at school where it was obvious that the dad should have helped, but in the end, this will destroy the child's confidence. They will develop the habit of thinking for themselves. I have believed that children's best friends are school teachers and their religious tutors. Where else can they find those who are in charge of them? An exact explanation of how I control 98% of people during their youth before they learn to think for themselves is crucial, especially in the religious aspect, because it is here that I destroy the habit of indecision by confusing their beliefs. They know nothing. It is also here that I plant the fear of hell. I understand how you manage to keep them fearing to think for themselves. Children grow, but not all of them can escape. I trap a child's mind through fear, and that weakness accompanies the advantage of a human being, contaminating their minds. Everything useful for achieving my goals is fair game. I utilize the supremacy of evil. I understand your diabolical method of inducing people to wander toward hell while taking charge of children when their minds are vulnerable. How you use parents and teachers to make people wander. One of my favorite tricks is to have many religious tutors work together to help me achieve this, teaching children to fear their independent thoughts. This is my main task. I carry this out through a very clever trick, convincing them to believe just like their parents do, in connection with important topics. This way, as you can see, I can easily perpetuate control, causing their children to become indecisive. In what other ways do you use this method to make children indecisive? I provoke children to become indecisive, those I have already trapped and confined eternally in the minds of children. I bend their will like men break and bend animals to my will. I ask how the will of a child's mind is bent through fear, and I will limit the child's power to think independently. I can remember immediately feeling chills as I relive the fatalism I experienced as a child. In contrast, I remember sermons based on faith. Does fear paralyze? Then thought finds its way to prevent people from thinking. I cannot exist in the minds of those who think constructively. The moment they begin to think in terms of constructive faith, they immediately become allies of my cause. I am starting to understand how you, with the help of parents and school teachers, assist in this detestable work of controlling the minds of children, not with what the public school system is so controlled by. How can any brave person change the current system, allowing students to develop their own minds, since those who now serve as teachers only act as means for that? Children from kindergarten and first grade, all raising their hands excitedly to learn, can contrast with high school students who avoid eye contact with adults and do not offer their opinions. They have detached from the learning process. What they perceive is that if they make a mistake, they stop participating to protect themselves from conflicts not in their hands or minds, as authority acts independently, leading to retaliation from the teacher. Children are indoctrinated with the idea that they are incapable of becoming excellent teachers. The critique is about what they believe. If you agree with hell, what do you think we can search for? Those teachers and schools that promote and applaud their courage. I had the impression that children should think independently, but that can be the goal of schools around the world, which does not fulfill that objective and use their own minds, but instead adopt teachings that destroy the ability to think for themselves. Children trust so definitely in their own capacity to think that others think for them. Clear thinking is in opposition. It will be interesting to see how I use it. Everything that parents, teachers, and religious tutors do in opposition diverts attention from me while they do so through fear, by mentioning my fear to such a degree that it destroys public schools. Teachers continue my cause, feeding their minds with unimportant information that does not allow them to analyze correctly what their teachers say. Those trapped by the habit of indecision are my tricks through which I dominate the minds of the wandering. To be a vagabond is to be my property. I must motivate them. Another trick, after I finish describing it, means they have a method that wanders so far from self-determination that they never return. This method is so powerful that its opposition cannot permanently control so many people. My opposition is to people except the people themselves. Nothing is certain. People who think correctly do not relinquish their minds nor influence. Please continue and tell me more about how people wander toward hell with you, of which I can control thought and actions. For example, I provoke that almost everyone experiences indigestion and destroys the power of relationships. I cause men and women to become indecisive in matters of money, their children's education, and intimate relationships, creating disagreements over such important issues that they become too busy blaming each other to break the habit of indecision, leading to dropping out of school. For the first time, it is defined except to earn enough for millions of people with the fear of poverty. I drive slowly but surely to the point of the habit of indecision. I provoke savings to the point of barely or nothing, until I take full control of the environment that led people into a state of indecision. I reclaim people through the habit of indecision, making them adopt the habit of having thoughts that fill their minds with controversy and control their minds. I do this by attracting them to the pulpit of newspapers, movies, and other media that are appealing to the mind. I provoke people to become lazy and too apathetic to think for themselves. Indecision and apathy are the same. It's true that apathy prevents us from reaching a definitive decision, leading to the habit of indecision. Apathy describes a true vagrant. I have been lazy for most of my life. I work better under pressure, but that is all. In examples from your own life where laziness has caused you to miss out on opportunities in time, man is the only creature that moves in response to the definitive laws of nature and wanders at will. Everything that is controlled by my opposition follows such laws. I control the minds of men, simply. Another way to say that I control the minds of men is that I control and use their own minds for a simple human. Let's return to the discussion about how this habit of indecision affects us. Say it in terms that an ordinary person can understand. What is indecision doing to us? Frankly, I must tell you that I also hate the men who signed a document that destroyed my control. They know that document as the Declaration of Independence, that damn document that now grants a right to free expression and thought. I must understand what it says. Countries controlled by self-elected dictators look at what I have done through Italy and Germany. See what I am doing through those people who have been caught in indecision. This is why they lead the way for me. What would happen if Mussolini, Stalin, and Hitler were to come for you and your mandate? That won't happen because they are doing so with the concession of their own vanity. This is another of my tricks. Let's go back to what you are doing to get people started. You are preparing the ground for a dictatorship by sowing indecision in the minds of people. Through whom is the president? I am destroying his influence with the matter of a labor agreement between employers and unions, so that he will have so little credibility that I can deliver that indecision, and I will end personal freedom in Italy, Germany, and England. Note regarding Karen, the president was Franklin D. Roosevelt. Do you think H would write the same words today? It leads to the conclusion that indecision is one of the most common failures in every step of life, forming the habit of indecision over any topic. The indecisive is simply like clay in my hands, since indecision destroys the power of thought. You can receive help from my opposition because how many people are wealthy while the indecisive never count among those who know what wealth means? It means something to you if I divert your attention to the fact that those who own most of the wealth always knew that money was the root of paradise. While the wealthy pass it on to their children, Karen's current phrase speaks of the love of money, not just the love of money in Timothy 6:10. Men who generally know how to stay away from such things are contagious. The indecisive do not acquire wealth. If people had more defined goals and desires, I would have fewer victims. I assume, then, that with the industrial leaders, they are clearly not friends of mine. They have restricted communion with people from both the city and the country, constructing structures that are enormous in application. They have provided through the automobile the freedom to travel. They have seen what is happening everywhere in the world through television, smartphones, satellites, and the internet, filling the village with books and providing the most useful knowledge that humanity has gathered. Every humble citizen has the right to express himself at any moment, anywhere, without fear. The citizen can help create his own laws for the country through voting. These are just some of the things that have helped my cause. Who are these men? Those who do not have control over you. I do not have control over the past. I control the weak, not those who are typically indecisive. Describe a typical indecisive person by looking at him. The first thing you will notice in life is their lack of confidence. They will spend everything they earn and more if they can. They will complain and suffer the least physical pain. They will lack the initiative to start something they have not begun. By taking the path of least resistance, they will always have control over their emotions. Such a person will lack precise knowledge of anything. They will be a specialist of nothing. They will refuse to cooperate with those around them, committing the same error of feeding and housing themselves. They will be narrow-minded and intolerant in every way that others disagree with them. They will expect everything from others, but will start many things and conclude nothing. They will tell you definitively how they can improve, and if forced to decide, they will retract at the last moment. They will exercise very little willpower, drink alcohol if someone else criticizes them, succeeding in their profession to think about what others strive to earn in any topic. If they work for others, the first sign of an indecisive person is that they always lack a well-laid-out plan that is definitive. They are always busy with many smaller goals. The tone of their voice, the agility of their steps, clearly marks them as a person who knows how to obtain what they want, regardless of how long it takes. They give direct answers and never fall into evasions, but they accept favors drop by drop or none at all. In a game or battle, if they do not know how to handle it, they will have a good memory and never offer excuses for their faults, regardless of whether they deserve the blame. In modern times, they are known as someone who lives and makes their presence felt wherever they are. Those who come into contact with their mind possess a mind of their own and use it for every purpose. This description is a non-indecisive one. Perhaps the spiritual aspect that is inaccessible to the indecisive is accessible to both. Both can use their own minds and thoughts. The typical indecisive, if you wish to cure him of this darkness, should provide some form of useful service to the greater good that he, the indecisive, must give. Is that not so? Yes, if it is. Some people doubt its existence. I am ready to divert from the habit of indecision because of the strength of my recommendations. Why don't you try to uproot it? Because that would be the best way to plan, rather than trying to eliminate the publication of my work. The publication, and then I will sit and watch you suffer. You will see if I do not. Note regarding Karen. Knowing that after writing these words I still have much powder left. Chapter 5 is right here. Your statement would be convincing, but they will obtain their release thanks to their confession, having delivered the weapon that will finally contain them, and superstitions. Remember, Your Majesty, your confession is a description of the methods through which you deliver the formula with which your control is maintained. I will not remain here long enough to deliver it to me. It will be imperishable because it will contain the truth, for you know this will be brief. However, it gives you more because slowly but surely it is any kind of fear without the weapon of fear unable to control any human being. Certain I will not stay here long enough behind me. It will be imperishable because it will contain, and this work that is being published in an alternative more than admitting that, what you say, let's proceed with your confession. But before that, my account now that you have had your moment. The satisfaction I desire, is it not true that you have allowed the habit of indecision to this truth more than a dozen times? Why the power in repetition? I am forcing you into the most distinct possible ways, so that, and determine its truth through your little tricks, you approve my method. Could you not make greater ostentation? Or yes, I am making proceed, and confess why you are unable to. I want to have your confession for support and peace of mind control. From the moment they read your confession, found the secret entry to my kingdom. You know they fear. You know that I only control the indecisive, that my hell is on earth and not in the world, that the indecisive supply me with the fire that, or energy that expresses the negative side of, with a forked tongue and a tail on a beak. You have your fears. Finally, you know that you can free yourself from that. You have contact. And this definitive notion damage. I cannot control you because you have discovered well, sir. Tied to the earth, that confession must feed your vanity to the point of explosion. Of it, this definitive notion is the blow with the dart was unnecessary. The type of knowledge with vulgar pleasure in vanity, the truth is ridiculous. Now let's continue with your confession. You use it. Is it not true that, yes, I use it useful with this mortal instrument. I exterminate, I am interested. Continue and tell me how you use it, which is hard to know where to start. I warn you, answers will provoke an avalanche of scorn in responsibility. Continue well, perhaps also hear about how to turn people towards the surprising. Continue with your confession, and others contains powerful qualities of attraction, human commoner vanity and egotism. All in some people these characteristics, a rope by which we can be bound. Flattery is the main lure with which, in fact, it is common for women to use men, especially those they cannot. I teach them their usefulness to both men, and that my agents prepare the ground and earn the necessary information to start the battle. Vanity through flattery. I elevate, and indecisives are hard to flatter. I exhort human relationships to be possible, since those easy prey to the habit of indecision. The lure with which men seduce is sensitive to flattery. Very easily importance to attract people towards people are more susceptible to flattery. Susceptibility to flattery people, the moment they become aware of their, what reason can women be more easily than well-dressed? Why is it more effective, a capital D? Tell a man that he has business acumen and purr like a cat, and you know what happens, P. All men are so completely under control that even with a double-edged paring knife, P. How flattery to attract men, for God's sake. About your method, you have no imagination, P.O. But I am thinking of the poor, incredulous, precise technique with which they could be a woman, can hunt rich men, and supposedly put it at stake with women. But as you demand, women influence men through to give soothing and childish tones to their voices. A hypnotism in connection with the flattery of women felt disturbed by this indeed in white, and carry on. Here is a truth, P. It is only the technique, then comes the motive by the woman, that perhaps she has in mind never sells of, that she sells her own egotism. P. That is all men are. This is the most effective they use. So I must believe that great men manipulated through flattery just as possible is happening every minute of the day. The harder they rise, the harder the fall, when the sum of their other tricks with which they provoke are one of my most effective instruments, is the to wander. As soon as they encounter, they will keep trying after failing. People to fail as long as it is the failure undermines our spirit, destroys, clogs the imagination, and frightens the concretization to permanently succeed in any project superior capacity to that of the late Thomas to these men. While the name of Edison, failure is a step towards success while not yielding results. P. It is the ability to main qualities of Henry Ford. R. Yes. And this same quality is the same in every man, that to discourage is one of the main qualities Enterprise note from Karen in the book 3 Feet from Current Leaders, not about their achievements, but persevered to achieve enormous success by the Hall of Fame of purebred animals with 3,704 beginning of his career. Many of the hockey owners told us that his perseverance motto was, "I found that if I showed up every day to a horse just to get rid of me." The magazine YD is one of the most tenacious athletes for all of us. Just keep showing up territory. Your Majesty, do you not wish to modify it? No modification is necessary, because the lives of men and women who achieved that, their successes have been in exact proportion to person winning. Loudly proclaims that the seed of a corresponding success, but there of an indecisive will, sprout to life. Only when it is of failures are only a temporary defeat and failure as an excuse to wander p. If it is the failure that does not seem logical, why try in the failure are? There is no inconsistency in your lack of reasoning. Failure is a virtue to start to wander. I induce the greatest number of that none of 10,000 keep trying. I worry those few who turn failures my opposition, they are the non-indecisive. And so clarifies the matter. Now proceed and talk to me about some of your other tricks with which you attract success, while others it. As a pretext, the failure in your life or one of my tricks is the most valuable instrument to make. That the ingenuity of this trick consists. I use mixed propaganda with the news of and private. I can see that this finds its way into every home where there are newspapers on television. And in advertisements I use to fill family courts. Industry is my main instrument to start the world in such a way that I can start epidemics that businesses panic at will p. If it is surprising that we have wars and depressions. What do you mean by the word propaganda? Simply, how do you provoke people to wander from propaganda? Is any instrument, plan, or method without knowing it, or they are the source of influence for the purpose of discouraging competition? Their employees, who get even using it, is used so globally and through harmless, although it is detected. I suppose some prepare the minds of Americans to accept, yes. Millions of my boys are preparing to Americans work through politics and organization, united with votes and not with bullets. Americans to see their form of government transformed. With that, our propaganda boys are putting the antagonism between employers and employees. When propaganda has fulfilled its purpose, one of 9 elders in your Supreme Court with their silly "will be given a job or will be fed from the men" are satisfied, they go along hungry, they go out of control. Note from Sharon Hitler to America. Was to put the government against from the treasury of the government. Is this the case have been established or proposed nowadays? And in independent businesses like industries, I've asked who came up with the ingenious "what you tell me about your origins and your reasoning for putting will and attracting men with your powerful propaganda to gain control through fear and annihilate them through war is intriguing. You have not observed my technique closely. You would have realized that I never achieve a goal through direct means. Instead, I use subterfuge and subtlety. What do you think I do to the minds of men to gain control over their own ideas? How would you call that? Are you going to tell me that you destroy people as you go? That is exactly what I do. That is exactly how this trick is done. Now I turn human beings into propagandists, consuming their anxiety for control. You refuse to answer my question because you know very well that those under your control also know that your victims, including those yet unborn, are victimized by you. No, your deductions are correct. This part of her is painful to reveal. Confession will prevent millions more from suffering. The only thing I can say is that you put me in a position where I know how your millions of victims feel in the mind of an individual being bribed. I use many pleasant things that individuals desire when they bribe each other. People want my best bribes. Love for money, the obsession with gambling, vanity about being a master over others, the desire for drinks through words and actions, the desire to imitate death, the desire to be a hero or heroine. A daunting list of bribes, Your Majesty. Do you not have favorites through a combination of them? Any human being of any age, from birth to death, holds the key with which they can silently open the door to indecision. That is exactly what I am saying. I trap a person who does not yet have the habit of indecision. I immediately focus on that person's mind. If their greatest weakness is, I figuratively intensify their desire, and when they are about to attain it, I snatch it away. After repeated attempts, the individual gives up. I fill the space in their mind with the fear of failure. Yes, I admit that your method deceives him and makes a lot of money, but do not fill me up. No, I do not fill the space. I transform the victim's love of money into great desires that he can acquire. For example, I provoke his indecision. Then I bombard him with images of the food he consumes. That also diminishes his mood. What happens if the victim is not inclined towards indecision? I trap them through sexual appetite, combined excesses. So food and sex are your two lures. I can trap most of my victims. I make them think that wealth is more dangerous than the desires they hold, all depending on who holds the wealth and how it was acquired. Observe all those who acquire wealth quickly, attempting to gain wisdom through it, and watch how the rich rarely match the achievements of their parents. This arises when they have been forced to gamble, or from athletes who suddenly find themselves at the mercy of the public. Notice how quickly they rise, mainly through sex and gambling. I control the greatest and best people. So many young people who admired them crash and burn with their money, thinking of the infinite number of those who lose everything in a few years after they fall into gambling. Could all this be that those who obtain money slowly, lending, are also easy to trap? I also trap them, but for different reasons. Some want one thing and others another in the area they desire most. But I manage to include them in what turns them into indecisive people. You can see how I attract individuals through their desires for the object of those desires, as long as it is extreme against the center, so to speak. I can encourage an indecisive person to help them gain the right control. Yes, that is exactly correct. I can afford to bribe because to bribe, I use the indecisive person who looks like a fish stealing the hook. The indecisive one takes from life what he can, but takes what he can with borrowed words. The indecisive one borrows money at a legitimate interest rate. The indecisive one seeks loans at suicidal interest for their borrowing. I deduce then that their hand is involved in all the problems, and it is not evident. My involuntary workers are those who I have to dominate through their misfortune. They do not wish to serve me, but do so through their habit of indecision. Now I begin trapping their victims through their natural desires, turning them into indecisive individuals if they respond to the seed of fear in their minds, or if I catch them while they are feeling down. Is this your method? Do you believe it? Who do you prefer to serve as victims? Young people, of course. They can be influenced more easily than those with developed judgment. Moreover, Your Majesty has given me a clear description of how to ensure protection against the habit of indecision. To protect against indecision, one must possess a normal body and a sound mind. The simple methods are: 1. Think for yourself at all times, granting you total control over nothing except the meaning. 2. Decide ultimately what you desire and be willing to sacrifice everything else if necessary. 3. Analyze temporary defeat without caring about it. 4. Plant the seed of a corresponding advantage that is equivalent to the value of everything you desire. 5. Recognize that your brain is a receiver for information from the universal warehouse. 6. Recognize that the only power of thought you have is over the materials you wish to manage. 7. Allocate your time to the fact that fear is generally a wasted resource of your mind. This is just a state of mind. 8. In prayer, do not plead, demand what you want. 9. Recognize that life is a cruel taskmaster. There are no halfway points or concessions. You are never obliged to accept what you do not want. You can fight for what you want. 10. Finally, remember that your thoughts will direct your physical reality through the ultimate law of attraction. Take care where you direct your thoughts. This is the simple process that combines those 10 points. If you were determined in everything you do and never allowed indecision to become permanent, once you possess enough willpower, assuming that you can break the habit by surpassing that point, you would not be caught in a spider web. You could struggle, but the more the net entangles you permanently, the more you would find it hard to escape. This has not been isolated or comprehended by men. What is this mysterious law through which, even before claiming their souls, all about how it works will be hard to describe? I would call it hypnotic compulsion. It is the same law through which you have the power to use it to maintain eternal control over your victims. That is true. I claim their minds and bodies, even if I can attract them toward the hypnotic compulsion. What is the permanent supremacy over human beings? I would like to give you a brief description of how nature operates so that you may understand how I use this law. But please, keep your account limited to the range of my own experience and knowledge. You of course know that nature consists of elements and that all energy in the universe can be precisely calculated. Each operates in its own way. The seasons come and go with perfect regularity. From an acorn, a pine grows. From a pine, a seed of a pine never produces an acorn. Understanding what we cannot see is the universal law that maintains perfect balance across myriad cycles. At one moment, this great universal law is at work. Newton, when he was on Earth, discovered this principle and called it the law of gravity. Had he done so, he would have discovered that the same principles help nature maintain perfect balance, where matter and energy are united. Tell me more about this balance. I have stated that there exists a universal form of energy that creates equilibrium between all matter and energy. This energy does so by constructing and dividing it into different lengths. Through the habit, you will better understand the method by which we learn to play the mind. Then, they relate to each other through the rhythm. Notice how the music fixes itself in the mind before dominating it through repetition. The systematic rhythm makes undesirable habits float indefinitely until they are trapped by it. But they cannot escape the energy with which the river water flows. So this is the way of people, right? Yes, all I have in mind is to induce its owner into indecision. The greatest danger through which people make their own decisions and forge their own destinies is also the habit through which I appropriate physical habits. Therefore, the only way for an eternal one is to maintain control over their own truth. You have defined the truth perfectly. They escape from my net, and I trap others in such a way that those who control and use their own mind are saved from eternal annihilation. I see that the power you creatures tied to the earth have against eternal annihilation is why it is my way to use your own mind. If you use that power, you become part of it by renouncing your own privilege of taking control over the person. By gaining control over their mind, you appropriate what remains of their individuality. Is that correct? Yes. That is how I work. What utility do the remaining minds have after taking control of others if they enter into indecision? I do not control their own minds, but give them the opportunity to escape from me. Let's return to how this law works. Show me how you use others. I want to know something about the most effective way to fill people's minds with fear. It is not difficult for me to make them wander until what fear serves your purpose best. Death is your favorite weapon because no one can prove what terrifies people. Those who give themselves up refuse to use their minds and begin to enter a hypnotic state from which they may never escape. So, what do they say about you when they talk about death? Do not talk about me. My cause would receive a severe setback from the minds being influenced by me. Do you think that some people wander and do not surrender to it? Instead of hindering your cause, tell me what you would like to appear on earth one day. A thinker. You ask me what would happen. I will tell you the greatest of all truths. That time would grant all they want from the material world, and it is a shame to think that the time people spend wanting from the material world would save it from such a thinker appearing in the world. The fear of criticism is the only effective weapon I have. This confession, after being torn from me and published, how long would it take for a generation of children to grow up and understand it? But if you published this confession, it would be those yet unborn and those who do not dare to publish what I have told you. I thought the wild practice of crucifixion, I do not refer to a crucifixion on the cross, it would freeze your income and you would become as despised as your followers. Those who pretend to use their own minds in masses from which you claim the 98%. If my style, note, Karen, I felt a shiver. Since circumstances undoubtedly prevented the well-written work in 1938 from being published until later, was the delay caused really by the leaders of religion and public school defenders? Or was it due to the work of the manuscript with the world? We must lend an ear to ourselves and take control of our own minds. To those who are not scientists, they do not like but true scientists are far from my domain, spending their time studying the natural laws and facts whenever they find them. But they have no religion. They have a religion of truth, the religion of natural law. If the capacity to penetrate the well-hidden secret that science will be responsible for the catastrophe exists, let's return to the topic of the hypnotic compass. I want to know why people can hypnotize themselves among others. Why do you repeat the questions? That is an old trick. I will tell you that I am forcing you to emphasize it. I'm also trying to see if you return to the hypnotic compass and tell me everything. Not now, but just barely. If you saved yourself from falling into the hypnotic state, until you discovered how to force me over you. How interesting. Are you not trying to be the best bribe I could offer you before gaining an advantage? What will you flatter me with? The desire to express yourself. What effect did it have? The main purpose of life initiated you through its bribes. That was enough, isn't it true? Yes, you are temporarily away from me. You broke your spell over me and freed me from the habit. Do you want to hear it? Proceed and respond, Your Majesty. When did you find great love in the woman? Will you accuse me of hiding behind a woman's skirts? I would not put it that way. I would say you have learned the seasoning of a woman's mind. Then, yes, her brain, when you and your wife began to dominate the mind, came across the power. Is it the truth, or are you trying to give me something important? I'm beginning to understand what the Bible substantially says: when two or more gather in my name, it will be granted. It is true. Then two must be present to access the infinite intelligence where it can be found. Does such a store exist? If it did not exist, this silly forced confession, is it dangerous for me? If I were you, I would not disclose it. You assure your victims of the habit of indecision. You must give to break the habit. Having that no one can be hypnotized by another person, nature can place someone under to be hypnotized. Consent can assume a lack of ambition, fear, or a lack of definition. It does not require consent to place someone in you need to surprise them off guard through their own mind. Remember this. Anything that breaks the habit of indecision must be done through the hypnotic compass. As I understand it, with which nature fixes positive energy, uses the hypnotic compass to do so, and thought. That is why poverty is, in disease, permanently fixing the state of those who accept poverty as a circumstance. The hypnotic nature will also fix opulence and prosperity. Perhaps you understand better what I mean. That its function is to fix permanently what your mind fears. Your mind will attract poverty. It will obtain its equivalence, physical equivalence, an immutable law of nature. Note, Karen, the attraction in the publication of March 1919, the last decade. This immutable law of nature, the renown of the book and movie The Secret, that whatever a man sows, that shall he reap. He could have nothing else in mind. The statement is true in all human relationships, and that is why in life one must accept what life grants. Life pays the indecisive their own low price under their own terms. Is the issue of undoubtedly, but only for the reason that can acquire what they want from life. Only, I do not see what you mean. We are all where our actions are. No, not exactly. You are where you are and your actions. Therefore, there is no such reality as the circumstances that people do not understand. In every reality, there is a cause. Often, the cause can be explained by attributing it only to luck. Luck is a hypothesis created by man. The terms luck and miracles are twin brothers of people, both used to explain what is real. What is real is subject to proof. Keep in mind that what is more accurate, what is more important, is that our actions follow thoughts. You cannot with thought, moreover all thoughts, but they are bound to do so. That reminds me, in addition to the minds of people, I inhabit and I can appropriate. I just told you that I am the explosion in the lightning. I am the pain in general, invisible. In war, I am the extraordinary commissioner, the executioner in death. I am the one of jealousy, envy, and greed. I am the achievements of scientists in instruments of all human relationships. I am the antithesis of immorality. I am the stagnation of all good and madness. I am the destroyer of hope, the demotivator of destructive scandals. I am the creator of every form of misery and frustration, and you do not call that cold and cruel. I broke the habits of men on an unprecedented scale. The excuse is the claim that the world offers no opportunities. They wait for the opportunity to be placed to suit their desires and demands of life. Note that they emerged during the Great Depression and from those opportunities. I believe that, and I would say the same today, thanks to the economic recovery, some will take advantage of their desires and demands of life. The undecided are influenced by the hypnotic rhythm. No one is immune to the influence of the hypnotic rhythm. Only gravity can influence the hypnotic rhythm, making men indecisive or not. The undecided do not escape the influence of the hypnotic rhythm, because it is their objectives, plans, and purposes that make their replicas permanent. Only the indecisive would want to avoid it. For a part of my adult life, I have been indecisive. How did you escape the majority of your life as an adult? It has been a desire for the potentials of the mind. Perhaps you diagnosed this desire for not having deviated. You are exactly what your dominant thoughts reflect. You do not use the hypnotic rhythm to make our actions nobler. Why does your opposition serve as a means to trap people in a web of indecision? Why does your opposition not benefit you? Solidify and distance them from your influence. The law says to use it. I use it in a way that is more attractive to people, bribing them to align with my type of actions. In other words, you seed negative thoughts and destructive actions. I often plant the seeds of fear in creatures bound to the earth, calling it God. It is as much mine as it is yours. It is within my reach to communicate the highest power in the universe through what you call God, or it can be used for negative purposes. Importantly, any human being can use it to prove what it claims. Yes, but it would be better if it were worth much among you sinners bound to the earth. Nor is the word of God from which you could obtain the benefits of your own power of thought. This is the intelligence of the infinite. There is no other way. We, the creatures bound to the earth, will soon see this because I have intercepted and diverted the forces that destroy your power to use your minds for attractive means, using the power of ambition, greed, lust, envy, and the urge to think, insistently pushing you away from my opposition so that they may be useful to my cause. If I understand correctly what you are saying, you are admitting that here, just as in other points during the dialogue, it becomes explicitly theological. Evil can express its thoughts as infinite as the ultimate source of all acceptance. It can give inconsistency to my style. It could undermine my opposition by sending, in other words, if you cannot control the fear, then you want to turn the entire wheel. By chance, are you also in politics? I am in politics. If I am not in politics, I have allies in all walks of life. Why don't you dominate the churches and use them promptly for your cause? Do you think I am foolish? Who attracts people's attention while looking for a representation through which to sow? What I do is use my opposition's allies to influence people's minds while they fear them. I begin to see your trick. You use uncertainty and indecision in the minds of the victims, which paralyzes them from helping themselves. It is something that must be observed and respected. Hypnosis is something that must be studied and understood for the determined ends that are desired. If the will is voluntary to reach the determined ends, it works automatically. If one does not know what is desired, it may and will work to achieve the revelation of the climate. Anyone can see, and all living beings and all matter must adjust to. They bear fruit and reproduce by themselves. Nature compels to create suitable leaves to cover themselves from, surviving if they are removed to regions with a completely different climate. In the most tropical regions, they survive and reproduce by themselves, but not in the same way as those in each different climate. Nature implants in an environment that is stronger than its own. It forces one to adopt the nature of all influences, making thoughts stronger than environmental influences. Everything within the range of that rhythm is in the power of establishing one's own rhythm of thought, which the hypnotic rhythm imposes on influences. Every city, every village, and any street has a definitive and perceptible rhythm. If you want to know the rhythm of thought, take a walk down Fifth Avenue in New York, and you will see that all rhythms become permanent with the thought of the individual. Yes, that is precisely the case. A person who thinks in terms of power, success, and undesired possessions. The person who thinks in poverty attracts these undesired influences. These are the results of habit. Habit implants the object of our dominant thoughts, attracting the things with which there is an affinity. Those who are struck by poverty, an ancient saying, misery loves company. They begin to succeed in any project. Effort, as time advances, all actions, consciously or unconsciously, await. Habit. The hypnotic rhythm controls the habit in its physical equivalent. In other words, if my demand is met with a willingness to pay, the acceptance of any substitute, the law of the hypnotic rhythm will transform it into its desired form. This is how the law works. Science has proven that people are what they are by inheritance or by the physical characteristics of their countless ancestors. The self-awareness shapes their earthly destinies as a result, especially under influences that have been so well established that there is no room to question them. How can the hypnotic rhythm influence people who are born into poverty, being struck by poverty and ignorance? The hypnotic rhythm does not influence what we inherit at birth. However, it can and does influence our environmental circumstances. If I understand correctly, nature adopts and becomes part of the environment. That is correct. However, there are paths and means of reversing the application of the hypnotic rhythm that exists. There is a definitive method through which, instead of destroying us, that is just what I want to say, that my description holds some practical value. This must cover 7 principles of psychology that utilize the hypnotic rhythm to help themselves. Then divide your description into 7 parts, one of the 7 principles with instructions. Karen has always fascinated me. The way an imminent death case now shows success is a very important turning point in imagination, as it did with mine. The chapter will now proceed to reveal the secrets of how humans can compel life to grant them in their description of these principles. I wish to know how one can use these principles. Tell us everything about the objective. Note from Karen. The interrogator acquires the courage in decisive moments to pursue the idea of publishing, and you will free all the precious souls I have. Souls that are yet to be born, you will free them from my captivity. Show me what you have to say about the principle of water over the fire of hell. However, I must tell you that any human being who can define their desire will be granted what they want. This is a vast domain. I do not wish to moderate it. When you hear the principle of concretion, it is so important that it robs me of control over people. The opposition firmly closes the door of our minds against me, causing them to acquire the habit of indecision. Why do all people say to avoid it? I have admitted that 2 out of every 100 people belong to the opposition, pushing people away from concretion. That is my opposition because I am a better salesman, feeding people generously with bad habits. Is the concretion of the objective something with which all people, as I have said before, are born? People lose this privilege by consulting with others. It can be preserved by adopting it as a policy for aspects of life. I see we take advantage of it, in which you would develop a strong physical body. You have spoken the truth clearly and precisely. I believe, Your Majesty, that in the long run we have found the treasure of self-determination in life. We have discovered that it is the lack of caution in man that allows for indefinition. Through simple bribes, we have managed to adopt the concretion of the objective as a daily practice. They cannot be induced to adopt the decision-making habit. You are incapable of it. This is correct. I myself could not have described how people neglect their privilege of indefinition and indecision. I have already made a point. I will go into more detail about how it works at birth. When a child is born, they do not bring with them more than millions of years of evolutionary ancestry. Their environment reaches the age of consciousness and begins to imitate others. Imitation first comes from their parents and later from other adults, including their religious tutors. Not only to physical expression, but also to the emotions that they fear, and express that fear within the range of their imitative habits, and they store it as part of their personality. If a child's religious tutor expresses any form of fear, that fear is added to that similar fear, creating forms of negative limitation that are stored. These limitations can be used by me at a later stage in life to limit their power of thought by filling their minds with all other negative impulses. Meanwhile, I introduce myself and induce them through the hypnotic compass. I must understand control over people while they are very young. I prefer to claim them before anyone knows the power of their own minds. In reality, I cannot control any definition. It is the habit of definition that closes me out. The principle of definition, as a matter of principle, is one step away from being removed. If a person hesitates, postpones, or divagates about something, they are wasting time. From Karen, the metaphysical and spiritual aspects of the author's ideology are exposed as intentions guided by objectives or definitions with our material circumstances. Your question limits my revelations because so few have understood in the past how to attract the negative application of this principle. I'm about to reveal one of my most treasured tricks. It is caused by anyone who escapes from me through filling the mind with the desire for power, and the individual falls into the habit of violating the rights of others. The law of compensation claims my victim. I see that a purpose can be proportionately dangerous. Most importantly, every principle of good is. It is hard to believe what danger, for example, the danger lies in the word habit. Every purpose can lead to indecision, and the search for this can become elusive. You know, of course, what I do with good purposes. The love of purpose can also become dangerous. The love of our fellow beings is dangerous. The definition of purpose can turn reason, will, and blind us to it. Those who self-determine gain spiritual freedom. They must carefully analyze every emotion that appears. You may be surprised to know that love is one of the habits of indecision for those whom I have placed at the top of my bribery list. I will have the signal on how that person can use the hypnotic compass. Love and fear combined induce people to divagate so much that they use their own minds. Give me control over one who loves more, and I can point out that person as my emotional tool of such potency that it can nullify reasoning without will and without reasoning for a purpose. But Your Majesty, life would not be worth it without the emotion of love. Yes, you are right in what you say. Love must be under your ultimate control in the ideal mental state. But it is also a palliative that reason and willpower must overcome. Those who desire freedom and self-determination must harden their emotions, dominate fear, and retain the power. If that is what you call tough, then they must apply definition in their daily matters. The weak can develop a way to become strong. It can be said that any plan put forth with determination can be successful, even if it is not the best plan. Purpose and definition of a plan. Through them, they succeed. It does not matter how weak the plan is. The solid plan is executed more quickly than a weak plan. We can and must always be right in explaining this. That is the idea. People who have purposes never accept temporary defeat as an end. You can see for yourself that if one follows through with definition, can anyone who has a purpose have the certainty of triumph? No. The person who moves with definition recognizes when plans fail and substitutes them with others but does not change their purpose. They persist. Finally, the difference between temporary defeat and failure is when one does not change their purpose severely. A plan based on the law of compensation functions as quickly as a plan motivated by acute feelings of injustice or immorality can bring. One must take into consideration the fourth dimension. Justice is the friend of justice, and it has been the cause of a wave of crimes among young people who confuse temporary success with permanence. The temporary achievements of immoral plans observe the punishments that follow as absolute as education and religion. This is a very serious matter, among the simpler and more concrete topics that interest me. I am interested in discussing matters of rich and poor, sick and healthy. In summary, I am interested in human matters to make life pay dividends. Let's be clear. You have captured my idea. Abstract matters are those that most people do not consider. Their problems may be a coincidence. It could be that the questions have indefinite answers. If that is the case, proceed and tell me more about the miseries and triumphs of those who understand and realize that sometimes people with a plan lead a life only to discover when they obtain it that they can rid themselves of what they do not want. The life lived is one that sheds everything they do not want. Anyone who surrenders to adversity for complacency and happiness always sheds the need for approval. We feel genuinely satisfied with being no less than others. Could we not all, in what you need to shed, commit to pressuring yourself when you feel contrary? A decision is not made, it is indecisive. What about marriages? Is it true that all marriages are created, thus always tied by their covenant? A bad covenant. First comma. Let me correct that old notion that in paradise I know of some who were created in harmony. They should never be forced to remain in friction and all forms of discord. The habit of indecision, of course, sometimes binds them to others through a forced relationship, which they desire even less. Obligation is one of the words that every human being has with themselves. Every person can live a full and happy life. Beyond this, the fulfillment of their own desires can assume the responsibility of helping others. They have the obligation to know how to live a life. Although compelled to respond accurately, they lived their lives in service to others. Seeking a full and happy life, you agree that to serve others, you first need to be selfless. And isn't selfishness one of the causes of my assertion that there is no greater obligation than to not owe anything in terms of obligation to your parents? Not at all. On the contrary, parents do not owe their children knowledge. Outside of that, parents can compel their children to seek and acquire knowledge through a false sense of duty. Too much help thrown at the young incites them in aspects. Do you believe that need is the master of a virtue equivalent to the gifts of all? A curse instead of a blessing is correct. They can become a curse instead of giving to our children. I am actually cursing my ideology. My opinion is not theory. It is a fact, a means to achieve the desired ends. A type of prayer that consists of empty words against which I am defenseless is the prayer of the definition of a purpose. How can a prayer be a prayer that one can rely on? It places you in a position to achieve the ends determined by the mere act of infinite intelligence. The appropriation of a purpose pursued in prayer fails. Not so, all prayers you say. The definition of a purpose you can trust now states that all prayers bring inconsistency. Most people who fail at everything else naturally turn to have their prayers answered. Well, their fears become a purpose, and faith in obtaining that purpose turn their dominant desires into its equivalent. A form of prayer is negative and attracts defined and positive results. It could be that they pray to God to take on the responsibility for all the needs and luxuries of life and make it a reality through the power of praying for something that should be procured by their own means. You are listening to an indecisive person. Intelligence and adapt to its laws do not discriminate. This helps people negotiate their way. However, the source from which you will have fine feathers, the law of nature, is so. Does that coincide with previous teachings? They press the limits of personal criticism and responsibility perfectly. Philosophers are truly extraordinary. Their theory of scientists, the definition is indecisive through the principle of definition. To nature, to deliver the most profound secrets that Edison discovered, the secret of the machine, and a dozen other benefactors of humanity, is the first requirement to achieve success. Exactly anything that teaches them to think in defined plans, or by the determined knowledge that is now pieced together within a few centuries. I feed on fear, but cannot rise from among the defined plans in the minds of those who omnipotence and accomplish all tasks at their command. The negative portion of the electron does not control the response. The answer is that both positive and negative charges exist. One finds balance, so to speak, with what you call the positive and negative of the entire system, one against the other. If this power of balance existed, the universe would quickly be reduced to a mass. Taking control of everything and directing it is exactly the same power that omnipotence is. It is called omnipotence, expressed through the positive forces of nature. I express myself through the negative forces, both good and evil, as the other. Then, the doctrine of triumph or failure, of being miserable or happy with this, cannot modify its nature. That is, it possesses a broad frame of choice in both its. You can use your brain to receive and express thoughts. Your choice in what you have said. I can think that the beings you or your opposition are correct. That is true of the immutable nature. We cannot. These laws are true. So it is true that man possesses rights and privileges that are not accessible, added that man is still not fully considering himself. Akin to the worms of other living things, the definition of the evils of man. Perhaps not, but you can be self-determined without it. Why are they not taught in public schools? For the reason that they are not part of any school curriculum. Children are taught to memorize and not to learn what they desire from life, going to school to accumulate credits and learn. From Life Note of Charon, again I find myself in 1938, and yet the manuscript was not published. Schools, I find myself on a personal mission for young people about money, a true skill. Schools continue to reject this because it does not satisfy the funding needs of the material and spiritual needs of life. I am neither the schools nor the churches. Prepare the children to think for themselves. There is something more important for human beings, the permanent knowledge of their minds about the possibilities of this, and the schools are so below the churches and the religions that their criticism originates from a lasting love for the underlying validity of all traditions. They do to weaken or corrupt them. This is what you might disagree with your church. Faith, where is the balance between accepting that and your soul and the reality of life in a world so frequently infected by evil? Not churches, I am simply describing them. Schools and churches are their staunchest enemies. I am impressed only by the facts. Reality is my most useful ally, and schools are a specific or general basis you have. Churches, as schools, help me turn you into a person who realizes that your denunciation is substantially of greater importance and that they have been responsible. I realize, man, I revel in it. If people thought for themselves, where would I be now? Your only hope for salvation lies in the control of their minds. People would be better off living in the about you. What do you mean by the term? In the way of experiencing salvation for any of the power of their own minds, ignorance and the sacred, what dominates me? That to which I am independent, supported by the definition of people. Just 2 out of every 100 to be considered. The churches take a break, and let's go back to schools. You move forward and perpetuate yourself from one generation to the next, controlling the minds of children before their minds. I want to know what is wrong with a system that can guarantee all children the opportunity to use that mind to attract freedom. A question sufficiently defined and since a purpose, I am here and now warning you that... Wait a moment while I catch my breath. You have given me an order. It seems strange that you come. Your Majesty, you are the one on trial here regarding the source from which you obtain. There is an educational balance sheet we have received, looking blindly for the way out of red, lost in the jungle. I want to know 2 things. First, what is weakness? And second, how can we eliminate it? The question, and please stop trying to attract me with abstract. That is decisive, is it not? No, do not misinterpret. Directly, to begin with, the public school system strives to teach them how to use their minds. No, that's just the beginning. Another of the greatest failures is in the minds of children and the importance of teaching young people to define themselves through education. Forcing students to saturate their attention in practical use of these ideas concentrates their focus on the important question of how to use the knowledge they gain. This system produces graduates whose names are known, but whose minds are empty of self-determination. Schools began as institutions for the elite, the few chosen whose fortune and family allowed them to ascend, but they have literally evolved through the public school system. Let us not complain about the state of education while we are discussing the importance of remedying this issue and providing practical solutions. Why do we save so many problems? Do you not know the 2 forces that control the world? Let's suppose they are weak and inadequate for the needs of society. Would they replace these 2 institutions? Stop making counter-arguments. I'm not proposing this. I suggest discovering if I can find ways in which these forces serve people rather than keeping them dependent. In light of all the changes in the public school system, do you desire the suggested changes in order of importance? Note, this is another enlightening exchange, but very instructive. Witnessing this discussion is crucial for the improvement of our public schools. You are forcing me to commit an act of betrayal against the current system by granting children the right to think critically, instead of following orthodox rules designed to keep instructors acting as the students' guides. Whenever possible, organize all the work in a way that allows each student to engage with everyday life problems. The ideas are for students to recognize the practical concepts that life demands of them. Teach students the truth that time is the most valuable and the cheapest resource. Teach that all people are influenced and show them how to navigate the luxuries of life. Teach children how to eat properly and the importance of good health. Teach about the emotions surrounding sex, and above all, teach them that they are capable of achieving great things. Begin by choosing greater good and natural possibilities, providing examples to dramatize the topic. Teach children how habits form. Make them aware of the hypnotic influence that leads them to adopt certain behaviors, which can guide them towards independent thinking. Teach them to confront failure and show them how to find the seeds of opportunity in moments of defeat. Teach children to express themselves and reject willingly all ideas from others unless they stem from their own judgment. Teach them to take time in making decisions slowly and reluctantly, and never without a good reason. The human mind is the instrument through which one receives knowledge. It specializes in defined thoughts, interpreting stimuli that provoke the harmony in their own minds. This enhances the gains that one can and should achieve, providing a greater and better service than what is expected of them. Show them the golden rule and teach them that everything they do for and on behalf of others also benefits them. Teach them not to express opinions unless they come from accepted facts. Teach children that negative influences destroy willpower and lead to harmful behaviors. Explain these evils. Teach them to recognize their parents, their religious mentors, or anyone else as sources of knowledge, regardless of whether they are pleasant or not, without resorting to subterfuge or dismissing the guidance of their sixth sense. through which ideas flow from unknown sources. Teach them to analyze these ideas critically. Explain the meaning of the law of compensation, how it functions in small matters, and that a defined purpose backed by a consistent plan is the most effective form of prayer. Teach children that the space they occupy in life corresponds to the amount of useful service they provide to the world, that if a problem does not have an adequate solution, the solution itself creates the problem. Teach children that their thoughts can conceive and believe anything. Textbooks are basic tools that do not reflect the truly valuable school experience, the privilege of learning from experience. Teach them that at any moment they will not be able to please everyone, and for the same reason, they need to accept that this is an imposing list, but seems to encompass all subjects currently taught in schools. This is a list of suggested changes in the curriculum for children. Well, that's what you had in mind. Unorthodox ideas that would impact most of today's educators, who need to stimulate brains that have been habitually stunted. Public schools will grant immunity to children, and that is one of the results that would bring about the suggested changes. Could these changes be imposed on the current public school system? Yes, many among others. The public school curriculum should include an entire course designed to promote harmonious interaction among children, teaching them the principles of life with minimal disagreements. What should public education teach? It should enable students to reach a position of independence. Should classes be abolished completely in favor of a lecture system like those used in higher education? Instruction and individual guidance should be received collectively. Any other changes? Every school should be staffed by professionals, business people, scientists, who would impart practical knowledge to all students regarding their business or occupation. This teaching should aim to save instructors' time. An assistant instructor could provide guidance to all students on the practical affairs of life based on their actual experiences. Note, this is another subject that requires addressing, that of scientists and business people in their fields, who could volunteer in the schools, as it has become popular among various groups. However, it remains seen as material for educational curricula, and we need to focus on recruiting professionals with experience in their fields. For the moment, as for churches, my entire life I have warned against sin and advised sinners. However, I have never heard any of you enlighten me on this subject. Sin is unhappiness. Humans who are ensnared by sin should be at peace with themselves. The notion of sin includes excessive eating because it leads to physical or emotional indulgence. It includes indecision, allowing the mind to dwell on envy, greed, fear, hatred, intolerance, and vanity. These mental habits lead to indecisiveness, which destroys self-respect. It is a sin to remain in ignorance because self-confidence is a sin if one accepts knowledge only as it is presented to them. This demonstrates an unforgivable laziness in using their minds to pursue defined goals or purposes. Yes, the privilege of self-determination should be viewed as a means of connecting with intelligence and inspiration. Yes, my task is to win over minds in the most effective way possible. Can you control the mind of someone else? Because that person never allows their mind to be influenced. I cannot penetrate someone else's mind. What is the most common and destructive sin? Add to the list, there is nothing more to add. One recognizes and uses the power of thought in contact and makes use of the universal store of words. Faith is the absence of all forms. This is another way to describe it. It has an indecisive capacity but does not use it. Everyone possesses the ability to benefit from negative thoughts with faith, which is the definition of a purpose supported by that purpose. That's correct, exactly that, backed by conviction in obtaining it, as in yourself. Chapter 10 discusses self-discipline, acting with purpose in everything. He who has no self-control will not be able to control others. How true that those who have fallen from grace could not control themselves. How can they control us? Where must we begin? By mastering oneself, controlling the three appetites that require self-discipline. The three appetites are: 1. The desire for physical food, 2. The desire for sexual expression, 3. The desire to express opinions weakly. Many of them, but first, when a man manages to master these appetites, self-discipline allows one to easily dominate natural appetites. They should be excused if they are natural appetites, but they are also dangerous. Mastery over oneself means not overindulging these appetites so that one can feed on what is necessary. Your opinion is interesting and illustrative. Describe how and under what circumstances the appetites work. For example, the desire for physical food. Self-discipline fills their stomachs with a pleasurable combination of food. But overindulgence in food can turn it into poison, stagnating the body's sewage system. Waste matter accumulates over time, and the victim suffers what is called self-intoxication, or entering the hospital. The machinery of the brain becomes slow in physical movements. If one could take a good look at the foul smell of one's own sewage, it becomes clear how the intestinal sewer becomes overloaded or congested. However, it is cleansed when it has been overloaded or associated with the pleasant and necessary combination of overindulgence and poor food. People who eat moderately and maintain their bodies work adequately. Imagine if your imagination could move with the definition of purpose. Enough poison to kill 100 people if put into the bloodstream. Note from Karen. Science finally confirms the physical processes and how they relate to the mind. I have ventured into this and many other occasions in observing the lack of control over physical appetite. Would you say that inadequate feeding is the cause of headaches? They suffer from headaches and subject each one of them to bodily harm with significant edema. And observe that no less than 5 minutes after their sewage systems have overloaded the intestinal tract, I get the impression that food also denotes mastery over the habit of not using food. Yes, that is true. It is just as important to eliminate the habit of unused food as it is to consume it. I never thought about self-intoxication among people, and I am completely impressed by this silent enemy. Let us listen to what you have. The desire for sexual expression is a powerful force, affecting the young, the ignorant, and the wise alike regarding sex. How can one dominate the emotion of sex? That emotion manifests itself in a form of activity distinct from the more significant impulses motivating humans. If humans controlled their desires for sex and turned them into a constructive force, they would never know poverty. Is there a relationship between sex and poverty? Yes, absolutely, if allowed to take its course. Is there a connection between indecision and poverty? Yes, there is. Leaders in every field of life are very aware of controlling their sexual desires, turning them into the habit of overindulgence in sex, alcohol. There is no difference between these habits and indecision. Why is this so? Because of the abuse that individuals have made. A person who refuses or denies control over it should not be excused. We should not exculpate the sexual desire. No, the natural human expression of sexual desire must be understood and mastered. Sexual expression is as natural as the desire for food, which one can completely stop. The natural flow of expression will burst forth like a river if dammed. It will find its way and flow freely. One understands the emotion of sex, respects it, and learns constructive ways to manage it. What harm exists in this? It exhausts the main source of human drive. It dissipates the creative energy of men. Sex is the most useful therapeutic force. It is the source of an attractive personality, enhances the tone of the voice, destroys enthusiasm, and reduces indecision in all aspects. I would like to see what beneficial measures can be taken to gain control over the emotion of sex. Controlled sex provides the magnetic strength of an attractive personality. One communicates through voice anything to motivate desires. It maintains the body to carry out the tasks necessary for the pursuit of our highest aims against all fears. It grants immunity to laziness and provides both physical and mental resilience. In defeat, it offers combative qualities for self-defense. In summary, it creates winners and does not proclaim to control sexual energy. Some important thoughts are offered. Perhaps some will think that sex is about the natural method of perpetuating all life. That idea of sex, that is, not a defect. It is a virtue when controlled, but a defect when neglected. Why do children not learn these truths? Neglect is a product of ignorance about maintaining health. One must understand the importance of keeping the sewer system clean. In all public schools and in most homes, parents should be instructed on the power to train their children wisely. What level of importance would you give to the topic of sex? It is second on the list. There is nothing of greater importance to human beings than clear thinking. I can speak about the 3 functions of sex and the ability to bring the highest importance to humanity. That is why it arises first, because it is the solution to all problems. It is the source of opulence and all good things. It is supported by an appropriately directed sexual emotion, the same energy with which we think for those who are willing to pay the price, mentally, physically, and financially, without learning to think correctly, without including as part of the control of sexual emotion. This allows people to see that there exists an intimate connection. Now, about the third appetite, we see what it consists of: the tendency to induce people to express weakly ordered opinions. This habit leads to indecision and is restricted by the law of hypnotic compulsion, which hinders weakly ordered opinions. One of the worst habits is the lack of self-discipline in the free expression of opinions. Why are there so many individuals who engage in this habit? It is a form of expressing innate egotism in people. The motive hidden behind it causes them to pressure others favorably. This habit attracts attention. Generally, the person who insists on speaking does not listen to others. But is it not true that the failure to listen creates an opportunity to benefit from others' oratory powers? Yes, a speaker relies on their ability to impress others, making the best use of this resource if they impose their speech. No single quality adds more to our emotionality, strength, and conviction. However, there exists a saying that applies to the free expression of opinions. What about those individuals who offer unsolicited opinions? The lack of self-discipline is one of the worst letters one can send to important people. Successful men in business, or whose names frequently appear in the press, often write letters expressing their opinions about matters. Unsolicited opinions are a harmless way of discovering what damage one can cause. Through that habit, one attracts their peers, the habit of doing something. Habits that are useless, especially the habit of going with the flow, create enemies and put dangerous weapons in the hands of those who give in to it. Thieves and swindlers become easy prey for those who write such foolish letters. The people who write these letters don't realize they are easy targets for all the money they refer to. Those who write this type of nonsense become enemies of the public. The column in which the newspaper publishes these letters invites people to get involved in unsolicited opinions. But now it has become a letter of criticism from an important magazine about their staff with an excellent salary. That is a significant point. Self-discipline is precisely where you are standing. There is nothing for good or bad in the power of natural law. No individual has the power to influence a human being, except the human being who lives, has lived, or will live, granted the innate privilege of free thought, which any human being can have. No one has the right to freedom of thought, nor the benefits of this privilege, either from their parents or their religious tutors. These are evident truths that are no less important because you would have learned them from my opposition. However, there is an emergency when they do not know where or to whom to turn, accessible to any human being. What is it? Thoughts, the only power they can control, and this can be corrupted, modified, and falsified. The power of their own thoughts, the only power. Note, perhaps you cannot control other people and their actions. This is easy to say, but much more challenging to do when, in reality, we can only control ourselves. Everything you say seems logical, but it runs so deep. Let's return to the 7 principles. It is clear that the secret of how to fracture the 7 principles has also been demonstrated to you. Self-discipline. First, let me summarize that part frankly. My 2 most effective tools against indecision and the law of hypnotic rhythm are not natural, but rather a habit created by man. The 7 principles are meant to break the control of the hypnotic rhythm and take back one's own power. Therefore, the 7 principles are the master key that opens up mental and economic possibilities. That is true. Yes, that is another lesson from adversity. Is failure a benefit? Adversity brings with it the seed of an advantage. There is a difference between temporary defeat and failure. It would deprive you of one of my most powerful weapons if you say that failure is one of your most valuable assets. In your confession that failure causes people to keep trying, you take control over it. Precisely at that point, you take control over it. If they knew that every form of defeat and that all opportunities would continue to fight and win success, one would not stop fighting. That's all we should learn. No, that is the minimum one should learn. As a hidden blessing, because it breaks the control of a new beginning, we are now arriving at some natural aspect of the hypnotic rhythm. It may be, and often is. No, that does not express the matter clearly. It's natural laws. Nature does not take away the willpower of the individual. The individual relinquishes his control. A man would jump from a tree and die through the impact of his body against the ground. You wouldn't say that he forgot to relate to the law of gravity, would you? He is susceptible to negative application and loses the privilege of thinking freely. Heights of success come through the free use of one's own self with the law. Is that correct? Now, one does not fail intentionally with a purpose. Circumstances over which the individual has no control create failure as a permanent condition, putting it in place. Therefore, it is something an individual can control. Nature does not force people to fail. Minds govern the law of hypnotic rhythm, and those who dominate those minds, in other words, the law of hypnotic rhythm and factual circumstances like permanent failure. That is permanent thought of success. Failure is something an individual can control until he forgets. Can this be true? Go. Have you been convinced by man? I believe he makes a compelling case, his failures and setbacks in business, my mistakes and stumbles. That I myself inventory my life allows me to value failure differently than what it is. Failure in helping an individual break the law implanted in his mind. Failure proves conclusively that something is wrong. Whatever the object of these goals is sought, failure is what we have been pursuing, and being reached creates a new rhythm. But failure does more than that. To prove oneself, one can learn how much failure can teach people to know many truths they never knew, taking an individual to an understanding of the power of thought. Once you've been a victim of it, you will see that those who achieve success in every endeavor are proportionate to their experiences of defeat before reaching the peak, where one has the privilege of a new beginning in another direction. This is all I can say. No, I have only just begun. If you wish to know the defeat and the other experiences that break habits, observe nature working, the physical rhythm of the body when cells. It uses economic depressions to break the habits of people relating improperly to policies, and uses failure to break the relationships that relate improperly to themselves. You will see that everywhere in nature, the change it brings is eternal to all matter. Every unit of energy has the potential to relate adequately to all other human beings. In what ways can one be defeated? When the commercial depression of 1929 occurred, the circumstance of nature broke the habits of man, and the peculiarity of publishing this book now intrigues me. I must understand that the compass that people relate to one another is more than a manifestation of the law of hypnotic rhythm. Would it be appropriate to say that their habits shape a positive or negative personality through the fabric of their thoughts and actions? They are either afflicted by poverty or blessed with abundance. The impact of this has become permanent and real through the laws of nature regarding the connection between hypnotic rhythm and human relations. While I'm speaking, I'm discussing the influence of human relationships. Men who succeed in business relate to their partners and others outside, largely due to how they relate. An attorney knows people and knows the laws of relationships. Failure before starting is a failure unless they trust him. Marriage succeeds or fails based on how they relate to each other. The proper relationship in marriage. Most marriages do not bring happiness because they do not understand or attempt to understand the law of relationships. Every word they utter, every act they perform in relating is assimilated and converted into a form that either grants them the wings of freedom or leads them to unhappiness. Every newly formed relationship develops into a spiritual harmony, sometimes called love, but it can also develop into outright rebellion. The compass that determines purposes and dominant feelings of faith or fear, love or hate, is imposed over time. In this subtle form, nature makes permanent the malicious motives and seeds of human character, coordinating and consolidating them into a defined form known as character. In the same way, it imposes these thoughts on the individual. Therefore, you will see that our thoughts themselves determine the direction in which we lead ourselves to very deep waters. Let's not go beyond a safe depth. Continue and tell me how it really works in the current affairs of a human being today. That is a good thought, but let me clarify those I am talking about. Before trying to influence someone's life, I want to make sure you understand that you cannot control, influence, or evade, but anyone can benefit from its inexorable functioning, which consists entirely of an individual changing their circumstances, and what the individual changes is the law of the hypnotic compass, more than anyone can change themselves. Remember, every human relationship is formed and maintained by the habits of the individuals involved, just like gravity. But anyone can change themselves without trying to change someone else just to feel in control, and therefore you were unsuccessful in solidifying the factors that constitute those factors before moving further into the discussion of understanding the principle known as the mind. The mind represents a hypothetical physical organ that consists of universal energy. Some call it the brain. It controls and organizes complex forms of thought known as the brain. These forms of thought reach the brain through the five senses, which are not well known when any defined form of thought is classified and known as the memory group. All the thoughts that evoke any of them lead to a memory similar to that of a modern office file. The dominant thoughts in the brain are found in a classification system, so to speak. At the moment the individual forgets to exercise the emotion, they are so powerful that they often provoke emotional outbursts that destroy the reasoning faculty. It often gathers combinations of feelings that are prone to lack harmony, and through the contact of the human being with the archive, as long as the impressions of thoughts are present, one can contact and inspect that which one knows, generally known as harmony. But perhaps the brains that are in tune with each other can easily and quickly exercise the privilege of thoughts among themselves in addition to receiving thoughts from other brains through the sixth sense. One contacts and receives information from the storehouse, and all information that reaches our brain through our subconscious mind is not easily isolated or traced back, through which we receive all the information not coming through conscious thought. If you understand how the mind works, you will understand why people crash into disaster through relationships that can generate human relationships to achieve material and spiritual success. Additionally, you will realize through understanding and applying these principles that no individual can reach success solely through the harmony of thought. You will understand why every human being should consider their brother both in fact and in theory. What keeps you away from safe depths where you could be in known waters? We can swim well. We had begun to discuss the topic. It seems we have somehow deviated from the subject. We have deviated, but we have not strayed from the most important part of this entire interview, the topic of adversity, in light of the fact that most inadequate relationships among people seem important. Obviously, the question arises about what constitutes a proper relationship, and the answer is that the appropriate relationship is the one that connects with or affects those that grant some form of benefit or are affected by it. Note that Karen takes home in the workplace those at stake. Make an improvement and keep them in your mind as you go on. Any relationship between people that causes unhappiness to any of the individuals. How? By changing the mind of the person who is involved in the relationship. Some minds naturally clash. Human relationships are formed by minds that harmonize in common ways as a means to bring them to success because they know how to choose successful associates. They thrive because they know how to associate with successful people. Remember the definition of a gel regarding two or more minds working toward a defined end. If there are some possible benefits, name a few. Adversity releases and discourages selfishness by demonstrating that no one can get everything from others. Adversity compels us to seek meditation and introspection. This leads to a deeper sense through which we can communicate. It forces us to recognize the need for intelligence found outside of our mind, breaking the opportunity to form new habits. Therefore, it disrupts the hypnotic compass and changes its functioning. Adversity generally compels us to change our perspectives, thus the strength of the hypnotic compass. In other words, when it forces us to acquire knowledge or a greater purpose in life, yes, and it compels us to depend less on material forces. Humans discover their other selves, the forces, only after catastrophe deprives them of their own. When a man can no longer use his hands or his brain, he places himself on the path of discovering the power of his own mind. Note, thought and our other selves are to discover purpose. What benefits can be derived from money? The loss of material things can provoke the truth that man does not have permanent use of anything except for his own mind. This is the greatest benefit accessible through any circumstance that compels us to break the control of the hypnotic compass, and new habits offer the only escape from the negative function to the positive. They do so because of some form of adversity that can break the confidence in hope. This has that effect on those whose long-established habits have the opposite effect of indecision. Indecision confronts all forms of adversity as positive struggle and does not offer immunity against adversity, but the positive is enough to overcome all benefits. The individual is then left with the right to think their own way through all their experiences, their power of thought for obtaining aims, with the intention of using this power for achieving ends. There is no rejection of using the mind, the law of thought, to some degree of use, whether negative or positive. It influences the individual about failure, but it does not influence them over the reaction to all forms of thought, and generally wins. Note: Karen, do you remember when you wanted to give up, but didn't? This concept is evident in stories of perseverance and not giving up, for all that exists has the seed of an equivalent advantage. The advantages are just the seed, generally the seed of an idea or project, or of some opportunity that is not easily accessible to human beings through the nature of common language. Through this language, humans adapt to its laws. For example, war arises naturally in the circumstances of nature in the form of a worldwide depression. The depression occurs as naturally as day follows night, and the law of the hypnotic compass operates quickly. I must understand that it is called the law of compensation. The law is the power with which nature balances all forms of energy and all forms. The law of the hypnotic compass works quickly in direct proportion to the benefits of the application of thought, but not always rapidly. Both the benefits and the individuals through the law can be harvested in how this law works, imposing on one generation the virtues of the previous ones. Nature, the fourth dimension, time, is one of the effects imposed by nature in relation to the circumstances at hand. Nature requires a good amount of 100 years to transform weeks, but requires 9 months to transform. Note: Karen, life does not offer immunity against the failure of positive thinking, which is enough to turn them into benefits. Has nature enabled us to convert our adversities into benefits? What are the potentialities of adversity and failure in the next of the 7 principles? What is the environmental influence? Chapter 12 describes the operational principle of the environment, which is composed of mental forces to human beings. What relationship exists if the hypnotic compass solidifies and makes human beings who are stimulated by the material from which thoughts are fed? They make them permanent through the hypnotic compass. The environment is the part that determines more than others if their mind is the most important part of our association with others. All people absorb the thought habits of those with whom they associate. It is clear that constant association with a person can lead to forming negative thought habits, particularly in that specific environment with that part of their surroundings. Therefore, it is important that we choose our close associates carefully, just as we choose the food that nourishes our body. It is always best for the dominant thoughts to be positive and cordial. Their influence over us is the greatest. Our partner in a profession comes next, followed by close friends who have little influence on the individual. The habits come from our environment. The hypnotic compass note indicates that sometimes they turn negative simply because of being in your child's or a co-worker's presence. Hill suggests that cordial and harmonious thoughts not only counteract a negative space, but also contribute to a more positive one. If it is a relationship you wish to maintain, you must make the decision. Why does our partner in marriage hold such weight? The marital relationship leads people to be environmental forces that become dominant in the mind. These thought habits are given permanence. An individual can change the impacts of their dominant thoughts, whether they are positive or negative, and the law of the hypnotic compass states that they can be modified through their thought habits. We can yield to any environmental impact, and the hypnotic compass will make the influence of thought. This is how the law works. It inspires thought. Those are the forces of nature that determine our earthly destiny. What kind of people are not indecisive? Or those who are victims of choosing their own environment become victims themselves? Is there no way out for the indecisive? Yes, there is a way out for those who have their own minds and choose an environment that leads them to carry out the definition of a positive environment. Eliminating the habit of indecision is a method that can clearly be seen as an effective mental state. We can follow to establish a more positive thought environment. The most positive of all is the cordial alliance of a group of people who have the objective of a defined purpose. Through its functioning, an individual can contribute to the alliance some idea that fits their need to achieve success. Eminent success becomes impossible without cordial alliances. Otherwise, successful people must protect themselves against the impact of an environment with relatives that makes it impossible to avoid the influence of another. No degree of obligation exists toward another, which leads thought in a positive environment. On the other hand, any influence that even comes from negative thought is not this way. No one can be strong without getting rid of all negative thoughts that result in, regardless of what or who may originate them. They can be controlled by the individual and led to negative thoughts that control the individual. I deduce from everything you say that those from whom habits are created are the owners of their destinies. What determines our thought habits? Is it inherent or acquired desires or motives? It is some form of defined desire. What is it about thought habits? Desires are impulses that mix with emotion and magnetize stored cells that have the hypnotic compass. When some thought emerges, it penetrates the emotional feeling of desire, immediately turning it into its counterpart. This is acted upon first through the law of the hypnotic compass, the strongest desires and the most intense feelings through the repetition of the same thoughts. What inspires action in thought? Most of our physical actions are motivated by the desire for physical food, the desire for wealth, the desire to perpetuate life after death, the desire for knowledge, and the 7 fundamental fears, which are human purposes. What about jealousy and anger? Do not these express negative desires? All negative desires are nothing more than a form of defeat, failure, or rejection, themselves the laws of nature in a form that negative thoughts arise. If I understand correctly what you say, they are inspired by our rejection or failure to adhere to nature. That is correct. That is exactly it. There cannot be emptiness of any nature. All space must be filled, both physically and spiritually. The human being is no exception. It was created to receive positive and creative thoughts. When the individual does not utilize positive and creative thoughts, nature fills the void with negative thoughts. There cannot be idleness, leading to a new and important understanding of life. Understanding the hypnotic compass means that the law maintains everything, and any expression of the principles cannot tolerate idleness or emptiness. When the individual does not use the brain creatively, nature fills the void, forcing negative thoughts. Note that I find this a crucial lesson for those who have much idle time on their hands. Remember when we were young, we were constantly kept busy with the warning that lessons like that are not interesting. What is right and just only interests it with its nature. That is an interpretation I need to confirm. All true thinkers ultimately agree that nature contains nothing such as dead matter, constantly in motion. All energy is alive, and nowhere is time and space so fast that it cannot be measured by human beings. What does it say about the sources of knowledge? Developed sources of knowledge are the possible entry to all the knowledge that normal contains within it, the possibility of infinite knowledge, where all knowledge exists. What can human beings become? They call it God. That is what it means. Through being developed to communicate at will, knowledge will emerge through the coordinated development of nature. Time is the factor that develops through recurrent events, such as epidemics and crime. Are all those epidemics in which a large number of affected individuals a product of the law of the hypnotic compass? The thoughts of a similar nature and provoke massive action. Then the Great Depression was the result of a large number of people who were influenced to issue thoughts, millions of people struggling to obtain something for nothing. For some reason, they panicked, and panic began through the massive thinking of fear of poverty, which prolonged the Depression, economically affecting the United States and the world. Millions were striving to obtain something for nothing when the financial system began to collapse. We can show the path, the choice is ours. Nature consolidates the dominant thoughts through some form of massive action, such as the Great Depression. Is that correct? You have the right idea. Proceed and describe the following principle that exists between time and the functioning of the hypnotic compass, the lapse required to give the object, and the nature of thoughts. The enduring nature is change. If that changes, rearranging and recombining all the habits of thought, how can the law of the hypnotic compass divide all the habits of thought into 2? Positive thoughts, our individual thoughts, are being recombined to fit the desires of the individual. They change from negative to positive or vice versa. The time penalizes the individual for the negatives. According to nature, the dominant habits are negative. The time penalizes the individual, solidifying it into permanent habits with the thoughts of the second of their existence. The term permanence relates to the individual. Since, in the strict sense of the word, the habits of thought can be formed by the individual, now I better understand how the mind works in connection with the earthly destiny of beings. Nature through which the experience occurs. People are not born with wisdom, but are born to think their way to wisdom. Only in very elementary matters is wisdom inherited and cannot be transmitted from one person to another. It compels an individual to acquire wisdom, not those who form positive thinking habits, the indecisive, and those whose thoughts are except from a very elemental nature. Therefore, a person who trains their mind to follow habits adopts negative thinking habits. These people can be classified as indecisive. By the grace of the non-indecisive, time makes it so that if I drift through life without a goal or purpose, I become a mere reflection of my teacher, and time only serves to solidify something more permanent about me. That is stating the obvious, which only applies to the non-indecisive who form dominant habits in their lives. Note from Charon. Again, I see so much negativity around us due to the long-term impact on our children. It is essential to generate positive thoughts in the ability to relate to the laws of nature, to relate to other people and to make life deliver anything accumulated. Is it not wisdom? Good heavens! If it were, science would not have been turned into a mere conversion of knowledge into wisdom. Time imposes it, if at all, by thinking positively, because for all people to have knowledge is never enough without wisdom. At what age do most people acquire it? Most people surpass the age of 40 before that time. Organizing knowledge into projects is more likely to lead us to failure, which are the universal languages of wisdom, but only to those who are ready to bring wisdom, not just to those who are willingly open to it. What determines the time and nature of our thinking habits is the same as knowledge tested by time, which is always superior to untested knowledge. The consolidation in quality and quantity of knowledge that has not been tested is what harmonizes with natural law, which means that time modifies and alters values. All values, that which is knowledge, is due to the rearrangement of facts and values, humanly, for better or worse, depending on how they relate to each other in the realm of thought. There is an appropriate time for planting seeds, just as there is a time to plant and harvest. Without the proper management of time between planting and harvesting, nature modifies or manipulates with the capacity to think and can through it. Note from Charon. I find that this is one of the key elements to utilize our ability to think and analyze. Through successes or failures, we can acquire wisdom. Describe the last two of the 7 principles. In nature, we can find evidence regarding the order imposed through the law of harmony. Everything within the range of an environment understands this truth, and you will obtain a new and deeper understanding of the environment. You will comprehend why the association seeks self-determination. Do you want humans to harmonize with the impacts that the hypnotic compass imposes on every living being? If nature compels humans to live, what means of escape are there for those in an environment of poverty and failure who desire to escape? Nature does not allow those affected by poverty to establish their own mental, spiritual environment and become part of it. This is the inexorable work of commerce, for example. Who establishes the factor? Is it the individual or individuals who think simply like that? Yes, the definition of a purpose can establish its own environment. I do not believe I am shattered by mercantile wars and depressions, everything except harmony. Nature does not seem to explain this inconsistency. Note, in our world currently, when thinking of military conflicts and human devastation, harmony seems hardly accessible. Hill would say that in his time, neither you nor I can control the inconsistencies you speak of as negative. Well, nature compels the dominant environment's manifestations. For example, a group of men in prison can and often are negative, but nature ensures that the influences on each individual there are still engaged with the home environment they live in. Everything in the universe, with everything else, is compelled to associate with one another regardless of whether they are in business. They are equally compelled to associate among themselves. Businessmen are so careful in the selection of their associates in any business that they establish their own environment in terms of success. Is that the idea? Is that what successful men insist on? Another characteristic of successful people is that they insist that their associates do the same. The main difference between a Henry Ford and the harmony factor is an advantage for us when the people with whom you work are aligning with the last of the 7 principles, the last, that the habit of indecision. The characteristic of indecisive people meanders through a series of circumstances. The actions they take, the indecisive person always ends up taking none, if not nothing at all. They do not choose their friends under their own terms, nor do they choose an occupation beyond the first job that provides sustenance, and then they enter agreements forgetting to know the rules. Forgetting the rules of good health invites the environmental factors they are struck by, forgetting to exercise the caution of observing fear in all its forms due to their lack of caution in marriage. They forget to use caution in their methods to relate afterward to enemies, due to their lack of caution in relating. It is said that, like the habit of indecision, caution is something all people lack. The indecisive person always uses indecision. They make concessions to weaknesses rather than addressing them. If they send an envoy to an important task, they ensure the envoy does not neglect their mission. Then they have been covered, but do not take anything for granted there. Their success is not overly cautious. Is excessive caution so detrimental? What you call excessive caution is totally different. Do we not confuse it sometimes? Most people create issues due to a total lack of the habit of caution that would enable them to use caution more beneficially, to relate to associates. The reason is that caution is the most important part of their environment and the factors of indecision. Or if one becomes a non-indecisive person, the choice of associates is never allowed to attract them through association without some form of useful influence or result. I imagine that caution in the selection of associates is essential. Does failure come from this? Surely all successful people exercise caution, whether in business, social relations, or in the choice of all associates. No one can, on the other hand, lack caution without attracting some defeat. Note from Karen: is it hard for you to say no to people? How can you, using caution in selecting, often reach the path to success? 3 things linked to my interview with him have significantly impacted my life. One fact that distinguishes the 3 most important factors of the hypnotic compass through which all habits are formed. It is a trio of forces that maintain the violated norms. The combination requires very little imagination, and one can see that most difficulties are simply the culmination of a series of indecisive habits, and with the help of time, those people find themselves with a victim mentality that they use in their own lives. Samuel Insull did not lose his fortune as a result of the Depression. He began to lose it due to a group of women who led him to run his opera. If any man in a great position is indecisive, the hypnotic compass and time provide precise information about Mr. Insull, and the time I served with him during World War I. Escaping from himself, note from Karen: I only worked as the personal secretary to Thomas A. Edison. By 1907, he had taken control of several hundred power plants. He promoted maintenance until collapsing in 1932, flew 3 times for fraud, violating the laws of business, and gives us a glimpse into the other reasons behind his failure. Immediately, the name Edison comes to mind, but probably the same depression that took down Mr. Insull without a scratch. If you want to know the reasons, I'll tell you. Ford had the advantage of time because he acquired the constructive ability to think creatively. His own creation takes any circumstance through the hypnotic compass and time, and you will be able to figure out every failure. Franklin D. Roosevelt came to the presidency with a fundamental purpose in mind: to take the fear away and help people through commerce instead of the commercial depression. The forces of the entire nation consolidated under the defined purpose of the president. For the first time, political trends, churches of all colors, and political organizations of all kinds joined together solely to help the president. During a conference held between the president and the nation, a few days after he entered office, he answered a problem, saying it was a matter of stopping fear and replacing it with faith. Before, the president had stopped fear and had confidently taken the path out of the jungle. Observe well the element of time. The president was willing and enthusiastically eager to follow the American market forces and private life. These are well-known facts to all. Just like all of us, Napoleon often thought of ourselves as victims of external sources. It shows us how to overcome victimization, another of the tools of opportunity for people to express their unprecedented political thoughts. With a nearly unanimous vote, with only 2 opposing, the wheel of life began to turn, and the political definition of purpose divided the powerful Labour group and nearly split the solid supporters he maintained in both factions. This divided Americans into pro and con groups. What the president had left of his political assets and his prestidigitator's handshake was obviously not what he had wielded. Then we have a rocket to power through the definition of a starting point by his habit of indecision. In his rise of the principles of indecision and non-indecision, which reached a climax through the power that rose like a rocket to power through his indecisive habit of thinking about other people who are in the same situation, who achieved great success only to lose it later in indecision. My whole life, I have wandered through the markings of opportunities for fortune. I saw myself meandering around my principle of lack of caution in business agreements. The law of the hypnotic compass was the defining nature of my life, in organizing an ideology of all my whims and my lesser efforts, but fundamentally was enough to restore my confidence. Every time I was defeated in connection with the nature of the habit of indecision, while connected with the classification of the law of success. Indecision seems more than a coincidence that my analysis clearly corroborates the claim. In retrospect, in my own profession, I can see the temporary defeats I encountered in obtaining my primary purpose in life. Problems of over 5,000 families that I know arise from harmony among themselves. They do so due to circumstances in their marital relationships that arose if there had been a defined principle, a definition of purpose. Thus, the history project and purpose more defined, and with the greatest difficulty to cover themselves, and are crushed under the heels of indecision. It makes no sense to look back on indecision. They have defined principles, while their opposition may perhaps be in the number. Opposition lacks a project or purpose, waiting for something to arise that will help them in those circumstances. The difference between success and failure is the power and review of this book. If we could summarize what I have tried to communicate throughout the book, it would be something crystallized in its physical equivalence through the definition of projects with the help of the law. There you have the positive phase of the ideology of life, through this book reduced to a minimum, to adapt it to the circumstances of life itself, that covers all human relationships. Here we are, at the end of the strangest truths of life that lead to happiness. After having had active cooperation, I have finally felt compelled to return to the great of all uncovered principles. I have been obliged to experience poverty, failure, and I was granted the privilege of understanding the thrust of these perverse weapons or destroy them. The dramatic experiences that life has granted me, if I had understood, would have turned my suffering of so many years of adversity and misery into something fruitful. I now discover, at the end of my interview with adversity, that the adversities were being ignited, and I discover that they were finally extinguished under my orders in relation to how failure can be converted into success. Failures are the result of dominant evolutionary forces that are united little by little and transformed into what we want according to the nature of those forces. It is true that from the moment I reached the age of reason, I could have avoided some of the benefits that would come from walking through the valley of the shadow of life. At the very least, the benefits you will receive from it will be in you in order to benefit from reading this and every part of it. You just have to think and draw a part of it. How reasonable you are as a judge and a jury in your case, the loss and the cause of that will be yours, crystallized in its physical equivalence by the definition of projects with the help of the law. I wanted to share this message with the world. In the end, it was discovered and shared, realizing that you are carrying your own burdens. They were being ignited, and also discovered that they were extinguished under your orders in a great way to create a defined plan, involving using the value of time to help you reach hope, courage, and above all, the definition of purpose. Epilogue. Whether you have read the entire book or just this epilogue, you will have realized that if replaced with those of our times, we would see what G says about media propaganda, schools, fear-based teachings, diet and health habits, and even our challenging collective consciousness. Therefore, it is never too late for a new beginning. As the Lord reminds us, I have also discovered that failure and forms of adversity bring with them the opportunity for a new beginning. It seems to consist of a polarity of failure and success, a paradox understood by the spiritually enlightened, who overcame the hypnotic compass and discovered their true self, the higher self or authentic self, spiritual, philosophical, and self-help authors of what he calls the definition of a purpose. We attempt to awaken from the hypnotic compass of what the Buddhists call illusion, the individual consciousness of our global family, benefiting from the integrity of what it means to manifest success in reality. You can take advantage of the benefits of this spiritually dignified assertion that elevates the saying, "He who has the most toys wins," which teaches us the importance of awareness of caution, an activity of consciousness that respects compassion and gratitude, as it is the gift of our inner panorama that shapes our circumstances, its nuances, its intuitions, its supremacies to direct us, empower us, and trust in ourselves. The most dangerous human condition he describes is the lack of discernment. Discernment is related to the repercussions before taking action, thus shaping our decision-making process, allowing us to create prosperity, which translates into money. He has shared his wisdom with the world, our inner being, our state of consciousness, and potential not only for our own but for the guided choice of wisdom on the part of competent hands. Sharon L. is the perfect candidate to offer the world today this manuscript, The Principles of the Truth of Napoleon Hill, perfectly conditioned thoughts, and live life to the fullest with all its gifts, talents, and abilities. In this way, abundance is made more abundant for you.